You believe toxic emotions must be eliminated quickly. But Olmi, Buddha taught that resisting emotional poison only strengthens it. When you learn to observe your anger without judgment, it loses the power to control you and dissolves like mist in the sun. Tibetan monks practice 20 ancient techniques that transform anger into compassion, fear into courage. Your pain is not a flaw, it's a portal. Prepare to sleep while listening to this video. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Have you ever noticed how emotions can sometimes feel like they're controlling your life rather than the other way around? This is where Vipassana meditation comes into play, a practice that has helped countless individuals develop a healthier relationship with their emotional experiences for over 2,500 years. Vipassana, which translates to insight or clear seeing, is one of the oldest Buddhist meditation practices still actively used today. At its core, this meditation technique helps practitioners develop moment-to-moment awareness of their mental and emotional states without becoming entangled in them. Unlike practices that aim to achieve specific states of relaxation or bliss, Vipassana is about seeing things as they truly are, including our often complex emotional landscape. The practice begins with establishing a foundation of attention, typically by focusing on the natural rhythm of breathing. This initial focus helps calm the mind enough to begin more subtle observations. Once some stability of attention is established, practitioners expand their awareness to include bodily sensations, thoughts, and, importantly, emotions as they arise and pass away in consciousness. This might sound simple, but it represents a radical shift from our usual way of relating to emotions. Most of us have learned to either grab onto emotions we enjoy or push away those we find unpleasant. Vipassana offers a middle way, simply observing without reacting. When practicing correctly, you learn to notice an emotion like anger arising before it fully takes hold. You might feel the initial heat in your face, the tightening in your chest, or the racing thoughts that accompany the emotion. Rather than being swept away by these sensations or trying to suppress them, you simply note anger is present and watch how these manifestations change moment by moment. This body scanning technique is particularly valuable for emotional awareness because our bodies often register emotional responses before our conscious mind recognizes them. By systematically bringing attention to different parts of the body, practitioners become attuned to subtle physical signals that indicate emotional states. You might notice, for instance, that anxiety consistently manifests as tension in your shoulders, or that sadness creates a heaviness in your chest. These bodily awareness skills help you recognize emotions at their earliest stages, creating valuable space between stimulus and response. With regular practice over weeks and months, something remarkable begins to happen. Emotions that once seemed solid, permanent, and deeply personal begin to be experienced as fluid, temporary phenomena passing through awareness. You start to see that emotions, while certainly real and sometimes intense, are not who you are at your core. This insight that you can experience anger without being an angry person or feel fear without being defined by it is profoundly liberating. The non-judgmental quality of Vipassana is particularly important when working with difficult emotions. Many of us have learned to judge ourselves harshly for having certain feelings, believing we shouldn't feel angry, jealous, or afraid. This self-judgment often creates a secondary layer of suffering on top of the original emotion. In Vipassana practice, all emotions are treated as natural phenomena to be observed with equanimity. This doesn't mean approving of harmful thoughts or actions that might stem from these emotions, but rather seeing the emotions themselves with clarity and without adding unnecessary judgment. This witnessing stance creates the conditions for natural emotional processing. When we fully acknowledge and experience emotions without suppression or amplification, they tend to move through us more completely. Many practitioners report that emotions they previously struggled with for days or weeks now pass through in minutes or hours when approached with mindful awareness. This isn't because the emotions are being pushed away, but rather because they're being allowed to complete their natural cycle without the added fuel of resistance or identification. The benefits of Vipassana for emotional awareness extend far beyond the meditation cushion. Regular practitioners find themselves becoming increasingly aware of emotional patterns in daily life. You might notice how certain situations reliably trigger specific emotional responses, or how one emotion tends to lead to another in predictable sequences. This growing self-knowledge allows for more skillful navigation of challenging situations. Many people discover that, with consistent practice, the gap between emotional stimulus and response gradually widens. Rather than reacting instantly to provocations, you find yourself able to pause, recognize the rising emotion, and choose a more skillful response. This doesn't mean suppressing natural emotional reactions, but rather engaging with them from a place of awareness rather than automaticity. Scientific research has increasingly validated the effectiveness of Vipassana meditation for emotional regulation. Studies using brain imaging techniques have shown that regular meditation practice actually changes the structure and function of brain regions involved in emotional processing. The amygdala, often called the brain's fear center, becomes less reactive, while connections strengthen between this region and the prefrontal cortex, which helps modulate emotional responses. Perhaps most importantly, Vipassana helps cultivate a fundamental shift in how we relate to our emotional life. Rather than seeing difficult emotions as problems to be solved or enemies to be conquered, we come to recognize them as important messengers carrying valuable information. Anxiety might be signaling a need for preparation. Sadness might indicate a loss that needs to be acknowledged, and anger might point to boundaries that require protection. By observing emotions mindfully, we can extract their wisdom without being controlled by their energy. Establishing a regular Vipassana practice typically begins with shorter sessions, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes daily, gradually extending to 30 minutes or more as concentration strengthens. Many practitioners find it helpful to receive guidance from experienced teachers, either in person at meditation centers or through the many excellent guided meditations now available online. The key is consistency. Even short daily sessions yield more benefit than occasional longer ones. The journey of developing emotional awareness through Vipassana is ongoing. Even experienced meditators continue to discover new layers of their emotional landscape and refine their ability to meet all experiences with mindful presence. The practice offers no quick fixes or emotional bypassing, but rather a sustainable path toward a more balanced, aware, and emotionally intelligent life. The Four Noble Truths as a framework for emotional liberation. Imagine having a clear, systematic approach to understand and transform the emotional challenges that cause suffering in your life. This is precisely what the Buddha offered over 25 centuries ago in his first teaching after awakening, the Four Noble Truths. While often presented as philosophical doctrine, these truths actually provide a practical diagnostic and therapeutic framework that remains remarkably relevant for addressing modern emotional suffering. The first noble truth acknowledges a universal human experience, the reality of dukkha, often translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. This truth encourages us to honestly recognize the presence of emotional distress in our lives rather than denying it. When we experience emotions like anxiety, anger, jealousy, or deep sadness, the Buddha's teaching invites us first to acknowledge, this is suffering. This might seem obvious, but many of us expend tremendous energy avoiding or denying emotional pain, which paradoxically tends to intensify and prolong it. This initial recognition creates an important foundation of acceptance, not a passive resignation that nothing can be done, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement of our current emotional reality. For instance, when experiencing intense grief after losing someone we love, the the first noble truth encourages us to admit, this hurts. This is suffering. Rather than immediately trying to fix or escape the feeling, we simply acknowledge its presence. This honest recognition often brings immediate relief, as we no longer need to maintain the exhausting pretense that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Having acknowledged suffering's presence, the second noble truth directs our attention to its causes. The Buddha identified craving or clinging, tanha, as the primary source of emotional suffering. This insight invites us to look beneath the surface of difficult emotions to discover the underlying attachments and aversions fueling them. When experiencing jealousy, for instance, we might discover a craving for exclusive attention or recognition behind anger. We often find thwarted desires or unmet expectations. Anxiety frequently stems from craving certainty in an inherently uncertain world. This causal analysis is tremendously empowering because it locates the source of our emotional suffering not in external circumstances, which we often cannot control, but in our relationship to those circumstances, something we can learn to transform. The second truth doesn't blame us for having desires or preferences, but rather illuminates how our desperate clinging to getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want creates psychological tension and emotional reactivity. Contemporary psychology has largely confirmed this ancient insight. Recognizing how our demands that reality conform to our preferences, she must love me. I should never fail. Life should be fair, reliably produce emotional distress when those demands inevitably clash with reality. By investigating the specific forms of craving underlying our difficult emotions, we gain crucial clarity about their origins. This clarity is essential for any lasting transformation, as attempts to change what we don't clearly understand tend to be ineffective or even counterproductive. The third noble truth offers profound hope by declaring that emotional liberation is possible. If emotional suffering stems from craving and clinging, then the cessation of that craving naturally results in the cessation of suffering. The Buddha called this state nirodha, the subsiding or cooling of the fire of craving. This isn't about eliminating emotions altogether, but rather experiencing them without the compulsive grasping and aversion that transforms natural emotional responses into prolonged suffering. This truth points to a radical possibility. We can learn to experience the full range of human emotions, including difficult ones, without being trapped in cycles of reactivity and resistance that amplify and extend emotional distress. We can feel grief without drowning in it, experience anger without being consumed by it, and face fear without being paralyzed by it. The third truth assures us that no emotional state, no matter how intense, is permanent or immutable. All emotions naturally arise and pass away when not sustained by clinging. Many practitioners describe experiencing this truth in meditation when observing how emotions naturally subside when not reinforced by mental commentary or resistance. A feeling of irritation arises, is clearly acknowledged, and then dissolves on its own when not fed by thoughts like, "I shouldn't feel this way," or "this always happens to me." This direct experience of emotional impermanence builds confidence in our innate capacity for emotional resilience and recovery. The fourth noble truth presents a practical path for systematically cultivating emotional liberation in everyday life. This eightfold path includes right understanding, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Rather than a set of commandments, these 8 factors represent areas of life where conscious cultivation leads to decreased suffering and increased well-being. Each aspect of the path addresses different dimensions of our relationship with emotions. Right understanding involves developing clear insight into how emotions operate, how they arise from causes and conditions, how they manifest in body and mind, and how our reactions to them often perpetuate suffering. Right intention cultivates motivations that naturally reduce emotional reactivity, such as intentions toward kindness, compassion, and letting go. Right speech and right action address how we express emotions outwardly, offering guidance for communicating and behaving in ways that don't exacerbate emotional distress for ourselves or others. Right mindfulness, the seventh factor, is particularly crucial for emotional liberation. It involves developing present moment awareness of emotions as they arise, recognizing their changing nature, and responding to them with wisdom rather than habitual reactivity. This mindful relationship with emotions doesn't suppress or indulge them, but creates space to respond skillfully rather than react automatically. What makes the Four Noble Truths so effective as a framework for emotional liberation is their comprehensive, systematic approach. Unlike methods that offer temporary relief or emotional management techniques, the Four Truths address the fundamental patterns that create and sustain emotional suffering. They invite us to work with emotions at multiple levels, from how we understand them conceptually to how we experience them in our bodies, express them in relationships, and relate to them in our minds. The framework's diagnostic precision allows us to address specific emotional challenges with targeted practices. For anxiety, we might focus particularly on understanding the craving for certainty and security that fuels it. For chronic anger, we might investigate the unfulfilled expectations and demands that keep it burning. For each emotional pattern, the Four Truths offer a clear analysis and pathway toward transformation. Importantly, this approach doesn't treat emotions as enemies to be eliminated, but as experiences to be understood with wisdom and compassion. Even difficult emotions contain valuable information and energy that, when approached skillfully, can contribute to our growth and well-being. The goal isn't to reach some emotion-free state, but to develop a liberated relationship with the full spectrum of human feeling, one characterized by clarity, balance, and wise responsiveness, rather than reactivity and resistance. The Four Noble Truths remind us that emotional freedom isn't achieved through bypassing difficult feelings or constructing elaborate defenses against them, but through turning toward them with courage and wisdom. By understanding suffering, investigating its causes, recognizing the possibility of its cessation, and cultivating the path that leads to that cessation, we gradually transform our emotional lives from sources of confusion and distress into domains of clarity, resilience, and genuine well-being. While the Four Noble Truths provide an overall framework for working with our emotional landscape, Buddhism offers specific meditation practices designed to address particular emotional challenges. One of the most powerful of these is loving-kindness meditation, or metta practice, which offers a direct antidote to anger, resentment, and hostility. Anger is one of the most challenging emotions we face. It can overwhelm us in seconds, damaging relationships and leading to actions we later regret. Rather than merely suppressing this powerful emotion or expressing it destructively, metta meditation offers a third approach, actively cultivating its opposite. This practice systematically develops feelings of goodwill, warmth, and genuine care, first toward ourselves and then expanding outward to others. The practice begins where true emotional healing must start, with ourselves. Many people are surprised to discover that self-directed anger and harsh self-judgment often fuel the anger we direct at others. By offering loving kindness to ourselves, we address this source of anger at its root. This isn't about building self-esteem or self-importance, but rather about developing a genuine attitude of friendliness and care toward our own being. In formal practice, we typically begin by sitting in a comfortable position and bringing to mind our own image or sensing our presence. We then silently repeat simple phrases such as, "May I be happy," "May I be healthy," "May I be safe," "May I live with ease." These aren't magical incantations, but tools to help focus our attention on the intention of goodwill. The words themselves matter less than the sincere feeling we attempt to generate with each phrase. What many practitioners discover is that offering loving kindness to themselves initially feels awkward or difficult, revealing how unaccustomed many of us are to treating ourselves with basic kindness. If you notice resistance arising, "I don't deserve this," or "this feels silly," simply acknowledge these thoughts with gentle awareness and return to the practice. Over time, most people find that this initial discomfort gives way to genuine feelings of warmth toward themselves. Once we've established some measure of loving kindness toward ourselves, which might take days, weeks, or even months of regular practice, we gradually expand our circle of care to include others. Traditionally, the practice progresses through several categories of people. After ourselves, we typically direct loving kindness toward a benefactor, someone who has shown us kindness or support. The natural gratitude we feel towards such a person makes it relatively easy to wish them well. Next, we might include a good friend, someone we care about but without the complications of romantic attachment. Again, we use the same or similar phrases. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. We try to genuinely feel the intention behind these words, visualizing the person surrounded by or filled with the warmth of our good wishes. The practice then extends to a neutral person, someone we encounter regularly but don't have strong feelings about one way or another. This might be a checkout clerk at the grocery store, a colleague we don't know well, or someone we see on our commute. By including such people in our circle of care, we begin to break down the arbitrary boundaries that limit our sense of connection and concern. The most challenging and transformative stage involves extending loving kindness to difficult persons, those with whom we have conflict, resentment, or tension. This doesn't mean approving of harmful actions or denying legitimate grievances. Rather, it means recognizing the basic humanity of even those who challenge us, and acknowledging that, like all beings, they too wish for happiness and freedom from suffering, however unskillfully they might pursue these aims. When directing loving kindness toward difficult people, it's important to start with manageable cases, perhaps someone with whom you have minor irritations rather than deep trauma. You might modify the traditional phrases to ones that feel honest, such as "may you find peace," "may you be free from suffering," "may you learn happiness." If strong anger arises, it's perfectly fine to step back and return to offering loving kindness to yourself or to easier categories of people until you feel more stabilized. The final stage expands loving kindness to all beings everywhere, without distinction. This universal goodwill represents the ultimate aim of the practice, a heart that naturally wishes well for all life, not based on personal preference or advantage, but simply recognizing our fundamental interconnection. This doesn't mean we'll like everyone or agree with their actions, but beneath these surface responses, we can cultivate a basic orientation of care rather than harm. The transformative power of metta practice on anger occurs through several mechanisms. First, it directly counters the thought patterns that fuel anger. While anger thinks in terms of opposition, separation, and harm, "you are my enemy." You deserve to suffer. Loving kindness cultivates thoughts of connection, care, and well-being. By regularly practicing these alternative thought patterns, we begin to rewire our habitual mental tendencies. Second, loving kindness meditation helps us recognize the suffering behind anger, both others and our own. We begin to see how anger often stems from pain, fear, or unmet needs. This understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does allow us to respond with greater wisdom and compassion rather than simply reacting with more anger, which only perpetuates cycles of hostility. Third, scientific research has shown that regular loving kindness practice actually changes our neurophysiology in ways that make anger less likely to arise and quicker to subside when it does appear. Studies have demonstrated increases in positive emotions, improvements in vagal tone associated with greater emotional regulation, and changes in regions of the brain associated with empathy and emotional processing, unlike suppression, which tries to push anger away and often results in its re-emergence with greater force later. Metta practice doesn't deny or repress anger. Instead, it acknowledges difficult emotions when they arise, while actively cultivating their positive alternatives. This approach works with the mind's natural neuroplasticity, its ability to strengthen commonly used neural pathways while allowing less used paths to gradually weaken. The benefits of regular loving-kindness practice extend far beyond anger management. Practitioners often report improvements in overall emotional well-being, increased feelings of connection with others, and greater resilience in the face of life's challenges. Research has linked regular practice to reduced symptoms of depression and PTSD, improved social connection, and even small but measurable increases in telomere length, a biological marker associated with longevity, while formal meditation sessions help establish and deepen the practice. Loving kindness becomes most powerful when integrated into daily life. This might involve silently offering good wishes to people you pass on the street, consciously including difficult colleagues in your circle of care during tense meetings, or pausing to offer yourself kindness during moments of stress or self-criticism. These informal practices help transform loving kindness from a technique into a way of being in the world. One of the most valuable aspects of metta practice is its scalability. Even 5 minutes daily of sincerely offering good wishes to yourself and others can begin to shift long-established patterns of anger and resentment. As with any practice, consistency matters more than duration. Regular, brief sessions will yield greater benefits than occasional longer ones. Many practitioners find it helpful to begin or end their day with loving-kindness meditation, using it as a way to set a positive intention or to process challenging interactions from the day. While loving-kindness meditation offers a powerful method for transforming anger and cultivating positive emotions, Buddhism also teaches the importance of balance in our emotional life. This is where the practice of equanimity comes into play. If loving kindness represents the warm, active dimension of the heart's capacity, equanimity embodies its cool, steady dimension. Both are essential for emotional well-being. Equanimity, or upekkha in Pali, is often misunderstood. It's not emotional flatness or indifference, nor is it passive resignation to whatever happens. Rather, equanimity in the Buddhist tradition refers to a mind that remains balanced and stable regardless of the changing circumstances of life, neither pushed away by what is unpleasant nor pulled toward what is pleasant. It's the quality that allows us to engage fully with life's experiences without becoming emotionally derailed by them. The foundation of equanimity practice lies in understanding and cultivating non-attachment. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring or not having preferences. It means relating to our experiences, including our emotions, without compulsively grasping at what we like or pushing away what we don't. It's about developing a relationship with life characterized by openness and allowing, rather than demanding and resisting. One of the most direct ways to observe how attachment creates emotional volatility is to notice what happens when we become fixated on particular outcomes. When we rigidly demand that a situation unfold in precisely the way we want, we set ourselves up for emotional turbulence. If things go our way, we experience elation, but often coupled with anxiety about losing what we've gained. If things don't go as planned, we experience disappointment, anger, or despair, often out of proportion to the actual importance of the situation. The practice of equanimity involves recognizing this pattern and deliberately cultivating a more balanced relationship with results. This doesn't mean not caring about outcomes or not trying our best. It means bringing our full effort to what we do while simultaneously letting go of our insistence that things must go exactly as we wish. As the ancient Bhagavad Gita puts it, you have a right to your actions, but never to your actions' fruits. This balanced approach leads to a profound emotional resilience. When good things happen, we can enjoy them fully without desperately clinging to them or fearing their loss. When difficulties arise, we can meet them with steady presence rather than being overwhelmed. This doesn't mean suppressing natural emotional responses, but rather experiencing them without being tossed about by their energy. Practically speaking, cultivating equanimity begins with mindful awareness of our reactions to pleasant and unpleasant experiences. When something enjoyable occurs, can we notice the subtle or not so subtle ways we try to grasp it, prolong it, or prevent it from changing? When something unpleasant happens, can we observe our instinctive aversion, our mental pushing away of what is already here? Simply recognizing these patterns creates space for a different response. Formal equanimity practices often involve contemplating change and impermanence. By regularly reflecting on how all conditions constantly shift, including our emotional states, physical sensations, relationships, possessions, and eventually life itself, we gradually loosen our tendency to grasp at permanence in an impermanent world. This isn't meant to be depressing, but liberating. When we stop expecting unchanging happiness from changing things, we discover a more reliable well-being that doesn't depend on circumstances being a particular way. Another powerful practice involves working with our attitudes toward pleasure and pain. Most of us instinctively chase after pleasant experiences while avoiding unpleasant ones, often to our detriment. The equanimity practice involves deliberately examining these reactions. We might notice, for instance, how chasing pleasure sometimes leads to greater suffering, or how avoiding necessary pain often increases it in the long run. As we see these patterns clearly, we naturally develop more wisdom about which impulses to follow and which to simply observe without acting upon. Buddhist texts often use the metaphor of the mountain to describe equanimity. While storms, sunshine, clouds, and seasons pass over its surface, the mountain itself remains unmoved. Similarly, a mind established in equanimity can experience the full range of life's weather, including challenging emotions, while maintaining an underlying stability and peace. This doesn't mean being stone-like or unfeeling, but rather discovering a dimension of awareness that isn't swept away by every passing condition. It's important to understand that Buddhist equanimity isn't passive acceptance of injustice or harmful conditions. In fact, it provides the stable foundation needed for effective action in the world. When we're not ruled by reactivity, we can respond to difficult situations with clarity and wisdom rather than adding more confusion and hostility. Some of the most effective agents for positive change throughout history have combined deep equanimity with passionate commitment to improving conditions for all beings. The relationship between loving-kindness and equanimity is complementary. Loving-kindness ensures that equanimity doesn't become cold indifference. It keeps the heart warm and engaged. Equanimity ensures that loving-kindness doesn't become sentimental attachment or burn out in the face of suffering. It provides stability and perspective. Together, these qualities create a balanced approach to emotional well-being that is both heartfelt and wise. In daily life, equanimity practice might involve noticing when we're becoming emotionally reactive and intentionally bringing a more balanced perspective. When stuck in traffic, for instance, we might observe our growing frustration and consciously release our rigid demand that traffic should move at the pace we want. In conflict with others, we might notice our tendency to take things personally and instead view the situation with more objectivity and calm. In the face of praise or criticism, we can observe how these trigger automatic pleasure or aversion and maintain a more balanced sense of self-worth. Gradually, this practice develops into what Buddhist psychology calls emotional intelligence, the ability to work skillfully with the full range of human emotions without being controlled by them. Rather than being tossed about by likes and dislikes, we develop the capacity to respond to situations based on what will create the most benefit rather than what momentarily feels good or bad. This doesn't mean overriding our emotions, but rather integrating their energy and information with the wider perspective that equanimity provides. Equanimity and loving-kindness provide essential foundations for emotional balance, but sometimes we encounter deeper emotional wounds that need a more specialized approach. This is where compassion practice, or karuna in Buddhist terminology, becomes particularly valuable. While loving kindness focuses on wishing happiness for ourselves and others, compassion specifically addresses suffering and our response to it. It's the sincere wish for suffering to be alleviated, both our own suffering and that of others. Compassion practice represents a natural evolution in Buddhist emotional training. As we develop greater awareness through mindfulness and stability through equanimity, we become more capable of turning toward pain rather than away from it. Many people mistakenly believe that focusing on suffering will only make them feel worse. But the Buddhist approach suggests something different, that mindfully engaging with suffering through the lens of compassion actually creates healing and liberation. At its core, Buddhist compassion practice involves recognizing suffering clearly and responding with a genuine wish to alleviate it. This differs markedly from common reactions to suffering such as avoidance, denial, or becoming overwhelmed. When we encounter our own emotional pain, whether from past trauma, current challenges, or ongoing patterns of distress, compassion offers a way to acknowledge this pain without being consumed by it. The practice typically begins with developing compassion for ourselves, which many find surprisingly difficult. We've often been taught that focusing on our own suffering is selfish or indulgent. However, Buddhist psychology recognizes that genuine compassion for others cannot be developed without first establishing compassion for ourselves. Just as on airplanes we're instructed to put on our own oxygen mask before helping others, we need to address our own emotional wounds to be truly present for others. Self-compassion practice involves several components. First, we acknowledge our suffering without minimization or exaggeration. When experiencing emotional pain, we simply note, "This is suffering," or "This hurts right now." This honest recognition creates space for healing. Next, we remind ourselves that suffering is part of the shared human experience, not a sign of personal failure or isolation. Phrases like, "Others feel this too," or "This is part of being human," help counter the isolating belief that we're uniquely flawed or broken. Finally, we offer ourselves kindness and care in response to suffering. This might involve gentle phrases like, "May I be kind to myself in this difficulty," or "May I give myself the compassion I need." It could also include physical gestures of self-soothing, such as placing a hand on the heart or taking several deep, caring breaths. The key is treating ourselves with the same kindness we would naturally offer a beloved friend in pain. As self-compassion develops, the practice naturally expands to include others. Buddhist compassion meditation often moves through concentric circles, beginning with loved ones whose suffering is easy to connect with, then extending to neutral persons, challenging individuals, and eventually all beings. Each step involves the same basic elements: recognizing suffering, remembering our shared humanity, and offering care in response. One powerful aspect of compassion practice is how it transforms our relationship with emotional pain. Rather than seeing difficult emotions as enemies to be eliminated, we learn to approach them as wounded parts of ourselves calling for attention and care. Emotions like shame, grief, fear, and anger, often labeled as negative or toxic, are recognized instead as signals pointing to unmet needs or unhealed wounds. This shift from combat to care makes a profound difference in our emotional healing. Scientific research increasingly supports the effectiveness of compassion practices for emotional healing. Studies have shown that compassion meditation activates brain regions associated with positive emotions and caregiving while reducing activity in fear centers. Regular practitioners show measurable reductions in self-criticism, shame, and rumination, common features of many emotional wounds. Perhaps most importantly, compassion practice appears to reduce our sense of isolation during difficult times, helping us recognize our fundamental connection with others even amid pain. What makes compassion practice particularly effective for emotional healing is how it addresses the secondary suffering we often add to our primary pain. When difficult emotions arise, we typically compound them with judgments. I shouldn't feel this way. Catastrophizing, I'll always feel this terrible. Or self-criticism, something's wrong with me for feeling this. Compassion practice interrupts this cycle by offering understanding and kindness precisely when we're hurting, gradually replacing these harmful patterns with supportive ones. Unlike mere self-pity, Buddhist compassion doesn't involve wallowing in suffering or creating elaborate narratives about our pain. Instead, it combines clear seeing with genuine care. We acknowledge the reality of our emotional wounds without defining ourselves by them or becoming trapped in stories about them. This balanced approach allows for authentic healing rather than temporary emotional bandaging. In daily life, compassion practice can be integrated into our ongoing experience. When difficult emotions arise, we can pause to acknowledge them with kindness rather than immediately trying to fix, analyze, or escape them. This might take just a few moments, a breath of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of pain, a mental wish for relief. These small moments of compassion, practiced consistently, gradually reshape our emotional landscape and heal old wounds. One of the most transformative aspects of compassion practice is how it shifts our focus from self-centered concern to genuine care for others. Paradoxically, many find that their own emotional healing accelerates when they extend compassion to others facing similar struggles. By recognizing our shared vulnerability and responding with care, we break down the isolation that often maintains emotional suffering. The Buddhist approach to emotional healing through compassion doesn't promise quick fixes or complete elimination of life's difficulties. Instead, it offers a sustainable way to relate to inevitable pain with wisdom and care. Over time, practitioners discover they can hold even intense emotions within a larger field of compassionate awareness, neither suppressing their experience nor being overwhelmed by it. As compassion practice deepens our capacity to be with suffering skillfully, we naturally encounter one of life's most challenging emotional experiences: grief and loss. Here, the Buddhist understanding of impermanence, anicca in Pali, offers valuable wisdom for navigating these difficult waters. Impermanence stands as one of the most fundamental insights in Buddhist psychology, the recognition that everything that comes into being eventually passes away. While intellectually we all know this to be true, we often live as though the people, possessions, and circumstances we value will somehow be exempt from this universal law. This disconnect between reality and expectation creates much of our suffering around loss and grief. The Buddhist approach to working with grief begins not with trying to escape or minimize the pain, but with bringing mindful awareness to the experience itself. When loss occurs, whether through death, period, separation, life transitions, or other changes, we're encouraged to acknowledge the grief directly rather than pushing it away. This honest recognition honors both what has been lost and our human response to that loss. Grief takes many forms, including sadness, anger, numbness, confusion, and even relief. The contemplation of impermanence helps us recognize all these responses as natural, temporary states rather than permanent conditions or personal failings. Just as the weather passes through the sky, these grief emotions move through our awareness, sometimes intense and overwhelming, other times quiet and barely noticeable. The key insight is that all these states change, they are themselves impermanent. One helpful practice involves bringing gentle, mindful attention to the physical sensations of grief in the body. You might notice heaviness in the chest, tightness in the throat, or tension in the abdomen. By attending to these sensations with kind awareness rather than resistance, you allow the natural process of grief to unfold. This doesn't hasten the process. Grief takes the time it takes, but it prevents the additional suffering that comes from fighting against what is already here. The Buddhist understanding of impermanence offers particular help with the mental suffering we often add to the natural pain of loss. When grief arises, our minds frequently generate painful narratives. I'll never be happy again. I can't live without them. Or, things should not have changed this way. These thoughts, while understandable, create suffering beyond the initial pain by resisting the reality of impermanence. By recognizing these thoughts as normal but not necessarily true, we can hold them more lightly and prevent them from defining our experience. Meditation on impermanence doesn't ask us to adopt a detached or cold perspective toward what we've lost. Rather, it invites us to recognize how the very preciousness of what we've lost is connected to its impermanent nature. The people, experiences, and circumstances we value aren't precious despite being temporary. They're precious precisely because they don't last forever. This understanding doesn't eliminate grief, but it can transform it from something we merely endure to something that deepens our appreciation for life's fleeting gifts. Buddhist practice also addresses the isolation that often accompanies grief. When experiencing profound loss, many people feel cut off from others who cannot understand their pain. The contemplation of impermanence helps counter this isolation by connecting personal loss to the universal human experience. Everyone loses what they love eventually. This shared vulnerability forms a bond of common humanity, even with those whose specific experiences differ from our own. Specific meditation practices can help work with grief through the lens of impermanence. One approach involves gently bringing to mind what has been lost, acknowledging the emotions that arise, and then consciously reflecting on the transient nature of all phenomena. This isn't done to minimize the importance of what's been lost, but to place it within the larger context of life's constant change. With practice, this reflection can create a sense of spaciousness around grief without denying its reality. Another helpful practice involves noticing the changing nature of grief itself. In the early stages of loss, grief may seem constant and overwhelming. With mindful attention, however, we begin to notice its fluctuations, moments of intense pain interspersed with periods of calm, memory, or even brief joy. Recognizing these fluctuations helps counter the belief that grief is a permanent state and offers hope during the darkest periods. The Buddha often encouraged his followers to contemplate impermanence not just during times of obvious loss, but as a regular practice. This ongoing familiarity with life's changing nature helps build resilience before major losses occur. It's like strengthening a muscle through regular exercise so it can withstand greater challenges when they arise. Regular reflection on impermanence gradually shifts our relationship with change from one of resistance to one of wise acceptance. This doesn't mean we become indifferent to loss or stop forming deep attachments. Rather, we learn to love and value what's in our lives now, fully aware of its transient nature. This awareness doesn't diminish love, but infuses it with poignancy and presence. We appreciate each moment with loved ones not as permanent possessions, but as precious, passing gifts. For those in the midst of grief, Buddhist practice offers patience and self-compassion. There's no timeline for processing loss, and the contemplation of impermanence isn't meant to rush this natural process. Sometimes the wisest response to grief is simply to acknowledge its presence with kindness, allowing it to move through us in its own time. The insight into impermanence doesn't eliminate the need to grieve, but provides a context that can prevent grief from becoming a fixed identity or endless struggle. In societies that often deny death and avoid discussing loss, Buddhist perspectives on impermanence offer a refreshingly honest framework. By acknowledging openly that everything changes, including our bodies, relationships, achievements, and eventually our lives. We can approach loss with greater wisdom and less shock when it inevitably occurs. This doesn't make loss easy, but it makes it navigable, a difficult but natural part of the human journey rather than a catastrophic deviation from how life should be. The practices of compassion and contemplation of impermanence work hand in hand. Compassion gives us the courage and kindness to face difficult emotions like grief, while understanding impermanence helps us hold these experiences in a larger perspective. Together, they offer a balanced approach to some of life's most challenging emotional experiences, neither denying the reality of pain nor becoming defined by it. Working with impermanence and cultivating compassion give us essential tools for navigating difficult emotions, but they don't address a fundamental question many practitioners face. How should we actually relate to our emotions in daily life? Should we express them fully or maintain tight control? This is where the Buddha's teaching on the middle way offers valuable guidance for finding balance in our emotional lives. The middle way represents one of the Buddha's core insights, discovered through his own direct experience. Before his awakening, he had tried two extreme approaches to spiritual practice. First, he indulged in sensual pleasures as a prince, finding that such indulgence didn't lead to lasting happiness. Then he swung to the opposite extreme, practicing severe asceticism and nearly starving himself to death, only to discover that this self-denial also failed to produce true freedom. It was only when he abandoned these extremes and found a balanced approach that he achieved awakening. This same principle applies directly to our emotional lives. Many of us oscillate between emotional extremes, either suppressing and denying our feelings or expressing them in uncontrolled, sometimes harmful ways. The middle way offers an alternative path that avoids both repression and indulgence. Emotional suppression occurs when we deny, ignore, or push away our feelings. This approach might seem controlled and mature on the surface, but it actually creates significant problems. Suppressed emotions don't simply disappear, they go underground, often manifesting as physical tension, psychological stress, or unexpected emotional outbursts. Many people who pride themselves on being rational or not emotional are actually engaged in chronic suppression, cutting themselves off from valuable emotional information and energy. The opposite extreme involves emotional indulgence, allowing feelings to completely take over, expressing them without restraint or awareness. This might temporarily feel liberating, especially for those who've habitually suppressed emotions, but it too creates problems. Unrestrained emotional expression often damages relationships, creates regret, and actually reinforces unhealthy emotional patterns rather than resolving them. The middle way approach to emotions rejects both these extremes. It doesn't ask us to suppress our emotions or to express them without restraint. Instead, it teaches us to acknowledge emotions fully while maintaining mindful awareness of them. We learn to feel our emotions completely, noticing their physical sensations, the thoughts that accompany them, and their changing nature, while simultaneously maintaining enough perspective to respond wisely rather than react automatically. This balanced approach allows emotions to flow through us naturally without either bottling them up or becoming overwhelmed by them. When anger arises, for instance, the middle way doesn't demand that we deny our anger or pretend to be calm when we're not, nor does it suggest that we should immediately act on our anger by lashing out. Instead, it encourages us to acknowledge the anger, feel its energy in the body, observe the thoughts it generates, and then choose a response that aligns with our deeper values rather than our momentary impulses. Practically speaking, this often involves creating a brief pause between the arising of an emotion and our response to it. This pause, even just a few seconds, allows us to step out of automatic reactivity and bring mindfulness to the situation. We might take a deep breath, feel our feet on the ground, or silently name the emotion that's present. This small space is where our freedom lies, not in never feeling difficult emotions, but in how we relate to them when they arise. The middle way also helps us recognize when we're veering toward either extreme in our emotional life. If you notice yourself becoming rigid, controlled, or numb, this might indicate you're suppressing emotions and need to practice more acceptance and openness. If you find yourself frequently overwhelmed, reactive, or regretting your emotional expressions, you might need to cultivate more mindfulness and restraint. The balanced approach is dynamic, not static. It requires ongoing adjustment based on our tendencies and circumstances. This approach acknowledges something important about emotions that both suppression and indulgence miss. Emotions themselves aren't the problem. They're natural responses that provide valuable information about our interaction with the world. The problem arises in our relationship to emotions, either denying their messages or becoming so identified with them that we lose perspective. The middle way cultivates a relationship with emotions characterized by neither attachment nor aversion, but clear seeing and wise response. In daily life, the middle way might manifest as being honest about your feelings in a relationship while expressing them in ways that maintain connection rather than create further division. It might look like acknowledging your fear before an important presentation while not allowing that fear to stop you from proceeding. It could involve feeling your grief fully after a loss while not becoming defined by it or stuck in it indefinitely. The Buddha often described the middle way using the metaphor of tuning a stringed instrument. If the strings are too tight, they break. If they're too loose, they won't play music. Similarly, our approach to emotions needs the right tension, not so tight that we become rigid and repressed, not so loose that we lose all stability and restraint. This balanced approach doesn't develop overnight. It requires patient practice and a willingness to learn from our inevitable missteps. Sometimes we'll err on the side of suppression, other times on the side of indulgence. Each experience provides feedback that helps us adjust our approach, gradually moving toward greater emotional balance. What makes the middle way particularly valuable is its flexibility. Rather than offering rigid rules about how emotions should be handled, it provides a general principle that can be applied uniquely to each person and situation. Someone who has spent years suppressing anger might initially need to practice more open acknowledgement of this emotion, while someone who habitually expresses anger in harmful ways might need to focus more on restraint and reflection. The middle way meets each of us where we are and guides us toward greater balance. This approach also recognizes the social and cultural dimensions of emotional expression. Different cultures have varying norms about emotional display, and these differences need to be respected. The middle way doesn't demand uniform emotional expression across all contexts, but rather encourages mindful awareness of both our internal experience and the external situation, allowing for responses that are both authentic and appropriate. Perhaps most importantly, the middle way helps us develop a healthier relationship with the full spectrum of human emotions, rather than categorizing emotions as good or bad, positive or negative. We learn to see all emotions as potentially valuable when approached with balance and wisdom. Even difficult emotions like anger, fear, and grief contain important information and energy that can be channeled constructively when neither suppressed nor indulged. While the middle way offers a balanced framework for relating to emotions in general, there are times when we need immediate tools for working with overwhelming feelings. This is where Buddhist breath awareness techniques provide practical, accessible methods for emotional regulation that can be applied in the moment, whenever and wherever we need them. The breath occupies a special place in Buddhist practice because it sits at the intersection of voluntary and involuntary bodily functions. We can consciously control our breathing to some extent, yet it also continues automatically without our attention. This makes it an ideal bridge between conscious awareness and unconscious bodily processes, including those involved in emotional reactions. When strong emotions arise, our breathing typically changes in characteristic ways. Anxiety might cause rapid, shallow breathing. Anger often involves held or forceful breathing. Sadness frequently manifests as sighing or irregular breath patterns. These changes happen automatically as part of our emotional response. But bringing conscious awareness to the breath gives us a powerful entry point for regulating our emotional state. The most basic breath awareness practice involves simply noticing your breath as it is, without trying to change it. When emotions are running high, pause and bring your attention to the physical sensations of breathing. Notice where you feel the breath most prominently, perhaps at the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. Observe the natural rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, the temperature of the air, and the movement of your body with each breath. This simple act of attention immediately begins to shift your relationship with overwhelming emotions. Rather than being completely identified with the emotion, feeling as though you are your anger, anxiety, or sadness, you create a small space of awareness. You're now the observer of both the emotion and the breath, rather than being totally consumed by the emotional experience. As you continue to observe your breathing during emotional intensity, you'll likely notice that the very act of paying attention naturally begins to regulate your breath. Without deliberate effort, extremely rapid or shallow breathing tends to slow and deepen somewhat just through aware attention. This natural regulation has a calming effect on the nervous system, helping to reduce the physiological aspects of emotional reactivity. For stronger emotional states, you might employ more active breathing techniques. One simple but effective approach is to gently lengthen your exhalation. When we're anxious or angry, our inhalations often become dominant, preparing the body for fight or flight. By slightly extending the exhale, making it longer than the inhale, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes relaxation and calm. You might count to create this pattern, perhaps inhaling for a count of 3 and exhaling for a count of 5, adjusting the specific counts to what feels comfortable for your body. Another helpful technique involves bringing awareness to the brief pauses that naturally occur between breaths, after an exhalation, before the next inhalation begins. There's a small gap, a moment of stillness. By gently highlighting your attention to these gaps, without trying to extend them artificially, you can access moments of natural calm even during emotional turbulence. This practice helps interrupt the momentum of challenging emotions and reminds you of the background of stillness that's always present beneath emotional activity. What makes breath awareness particularly valuable for emotional regulation is its accessibility. Your breath is always with you, requiring no special equipment, environment, or extended time commitment. You can practice breath awareness while sitting in a difficult meeting, during a challenging conversation, stuck in traffic, or lying awake with nighttime anxiety. Even 30 seconds of conscious breathing can create a meaningful shift in your emotional state. With consistent practice, the connection between breath awareness and emotional regulation becomes increasingly automatic. Many long-term practitioners report that their attention naturally moves to their breath when emotions intensify, creating a built-in pause before reaction. This doesn't mean they never experience strong emotions, but rather that they've developed a reliable internal resource for working with these emotions skillfully. Scientific research strongly supports the effectiveness of breath-focused practices for emotional regulation. Neuroimaging studies show that even brief periods of focused breath awareness can reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system associated with fear and stress responses, while increasing activity in prefrontal regions associated with executive function and wise decision-making. Other studies have demonstrated how regulated breathing practices can lower cortisol levels, reduce blood pressure, and improve heart rate variability, all physiological markers of a well-regulated emotional state. For those new to breath awareness practices, it's helpful to establish a foundation through regular, brief sessions when you're not in the grip of strong emotions. You might set aside 3 to 5 minutes several times a day to simply sit and observe your breathing. This builds the attentional muscle that makes the practice effective during emotional challenges. It's like learning to swim in calm waters before trying to navigate rough seas. It's also important to approach breath awareness with an attitude of gentle invitation rather than forceful control. The goal isn't to aggressively manipulate your breathing or suppress emotional energy, but rather to bring kind attention to the breath as it is. This gentle approach allows the natural regulatory capacity of your nervous system to engage, rather than creating additional tension through effortful control. When practicing breath awareness during intense emotions, you may notice that your attention repeatedly gets pulled away by emotional thoughts. This is perfectly normal. Each time you notice your mind has wandered, simply return your attention to the physical sensations of breathing without self-criticism. This repeated returning, perhaps thousands of times over months of practice, gradually strengthens your ability to maintain presence during emotional challenges. While breath awareness is a powerful standalone practice for emotional regulation, it also serves as an excellent foundation for other Buddhist approaches to working with difficult emotions. The stability and calm that come from connecting with the breath create the conditions for practices like compassion meditation, investigation of impermanence, or application of the middle way. In this sense, breath awareness often functions as a first aid measure that creates enough space for more transformative practices to be applied. The Buddha's teachings on breath awareness go far beyond mere stress reduction or emotional management. They offer a pathway to profound insights about the nature of mind and experience. Yet their beauty lies partly in their simplicity and immediate utility. Even someone with no interest in Buddhism or meditation can benefit from the basic practice of pausing to connect with their breath during emotional intensity. The breath truly serves as an always available resource for navigating the sometimes turbulent waters of our emotional lives. While breath awareness offers an immediate tool for managing emotional intensity, there are specific Buddhist practices designed to address particular challenging emotions. Among these, jealousy stands out as an especially painful and common experience. Most of us have felt that distinctive sting when hearing about someone else's success, good fortune, or happiness, that uncomfortable mix of envy, resentment, and inadequacy that can poison relationships and undermine our well-being. Buddhism offers a powerful antidote to jealousy through the practice of mudita, or appreciative joy. Mudita is one of the 4 divine abodes or sublime states in Buddhist psychology, alongside loving-kindness, compassion, and equanimity. While loving-kindness wishes others to be happy and compassion responds to suffering, appreciative joy specifically celebrates the happiness and success that others are already experiencing. It's the opposite of jealousy. Instead of feeling diminished by others' good fortune, we feel genuine delight. This might sound simple in theory, but in practice, many people find mudita surprisingly challenging. We live in a competitive culture that often frames success as a zero-sum game. If someone else is winning, we must be losing. From early childhood, we're frequently compared to others at school, in sports, in careers, and even in personal attributes like appearance or personality. These comparisons create a fertile ground for jealousy to take root and flourish. The practice of mudita directly challenges this competitive mindset. It's based on the understanding that happiness isn't a limited resource that gets depleted when others receive it. Unlike material goods, joy actually multiplies when it's shared. When we can genuinely celebrate others' happiness, we get to participate in that happiness ourselves, expanding our own emotional range and well-being in the process. The formal practice of mudita meditation follows a structure similar to loving-kindness meditation. You might begin by bringing to mind someone whose happiness is easy to celebrate, perhaps a child, a dear friend who deserves good things, or someone who has overcome significant challenges. As you hold this person in mind, consciously reflect on their good fortune, success, or happiness, and allow yourself to feel genuine joy in response. You might use phrases such as, "May your happiness continue," or "I rejoice in your good fortune." After establishing the feeling of appreciative joy with an easy person, The practice gradually expands to include those toward whom you feel neutral, then those you find challenging, and eventually all beings. With each person, the practice involves the same basic movement, consciously bringing to mind their happiness or success and intentionally cultivating a feeling of celebration rather than comparison or envy. What makes mudita particularly effective for transforming jealousy is how it directly addresses the root of the problem. Jealousy stems from a sense of lack or deficiency, the belief that someone else's good fortune somehow diminishes our own. Appreciative joy works directly with this perception, helping us recognize that we don't need to feel threatened by others' happiness. In fact, we can use others' joy as an opportunity to expand our own positive experience. Many practitioners find it helpful to investigate jealousy closely when it arises, rather than just trying to replace it with appreciative joy immediately. Take a moment to notice the actual experience of jealousy in the body and mind. Where do you feel it physically? What thoughts typically accompany it? How does it color your perception of yourself and others? This mindful investigation often reveals that jealousy creates suffering primarily for the person experiencing it, while having little effect on its target. The practice of mudita also reveals something important about the nature of happiness itself. When we're caught in jealousy, we tend to focus on external markers of success, money, status, relationships, achievements, or possessions. But as we practice appreciative joy, we often discover that true happiness has more to do with our internal relationship to experience than with these external circumstances. We can be genuinely happy for someone who has something we don't, and this capacity itself becomes a source of well-being independent of our external situation. One of the most powerful aspects of practicing mudita is how it transforms our relationships. When we can genuinely celebrate others' happiness rather than feeling threatened by it, we become the kind of person others naturally want to include in their good fortune, rather than hiding their successes from us for fear of triggering jealousy. People feel safe sharing their joy, creating deeper connection and intimacy. The practice can be particularly transformative in close relationships where jealousy often causes damage. In romantic partnerships, friendships, or family relationships, being able to genuinely celebrate the other person's achievements, opportunities, or happiness, even when they exceed our own, creates a foundation of mutual support and goodwill. Instead of competing, we become each other's cheerleaders. In work environments, where competitive jealousy is often considered normal, practicing mudita can radically change the atmosphere. When we can sincerely celebrate colleagues' successes rather than feeling diminished by them, collaboration flourishes. We begin to see that we're all part of the same team, and one person's success ultimately contributes to the whole. Neuroscience research suggests that practicing appreciative joy may actually rewire brain circuits involved in reward processing. When we habitually respond to others' good fortune with jealousy, we strengthen neural pathways that perceive others' gain as our loss. By repeatedly practicing the alternative response of celebration, we gradually create new neural pathways that associate others' happiness with our own positive feelings. Like any Buddhist practice, cultivating appreciative joy takes time and patience. You might begin by looking for small opportunities in daily life, genuinely congratulating a coworker on recognition they received, celebrating a friend's good news, or simply smiling with real happiness when you see strangers enjoying themselves. These small moments, practiced consistently, gradually build the capacity for more challenging situations. It's also helpful to be realistic about the process. If you've spent decades with habitual jealousy, don't expect it to disappear overnight. You might initially aim for just creating a small pause when jealousy arises, enough space to recognize what's happening and plant a tiny seed of alternative response. With practice, these seeds grow into the natural capacity to feel appreciative joy even in situations that once would have triggered intense jealousy. The ultimate goal isn't to never experience jealousy, That would be unrealistic, given how deeply ingrained these responses can be. Rather, the aim is to develop enough awareness and alternative capacity that jealousy no longer controls your reactions or damages your relationships over time. Many practitioners find that the painful sting of jealousy diminishes, while the natural delight in others' happiness grows increasingly accessible. While mudita helps us transform the outward-focused emotion of jealousy, many of us also struggle with painful emotions directed toward ourselves, particularly guilt and shame. These self-conscious emotions can be especially difficult to navigate, often leading to cycles of self-criticism that undermine well-being and hinder personal growth. This is where Buddhist ethics, or sila, offers valuable guidance for resolving these challenging emotions constructively. Buddhist ethics differ significantly from many Western approaches to morality. Rather than focusing primarily on rules imposed from outside or concepts of sin and punishment, Sila emphasizes intentional cultivation of wholesome qualities and actions that naturally lead to well-being for oneself and others. This approach provides a particularly helpful framework for working with guilt and shame, as it focuses on learning and growth rather than self-condemnation. First, it's important to distinguish between guilt and shame, as they function differently and require somewhat different approaches. Guilt involves feeling bad about specific actions or behaviors. I did something wrong. Shame, however, attacks our very sense of self. I am wrong, or I am fundamentally flawed. While appropriate guilt can motivate positive change, shame tends to be paralyzing and destructive. Buddhist ethics helps address both, but does so by transforming their energy rather than becoming stuck in them. The foundation of Buddhist ethics is typically expressed through the 5 precepts: commitments to refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and using intoxicants that cloud the mind. Unlike commandments, these precepts are undertaken voluntarily as training principles that promote harmony and clear awareness. They provide practical guidelines for actions that naturally reduce remorse and promote inner peace. When guilt arises from genuinely harmful actions, Buddhist ethics doesn't suggest suppressing or denying this feeling. Instead, the tradition offers a constructive process for working with it. The first step involves clearly acknowledging what happened without minimization or exaggeration. This honest recognition is crucial. We can't learn from mistakes we refuse to see. Next comes understanding the harmful action in context, recognizing the conditions and choices that contributed to it without using these as excuses. This might involve reflecting on the mental states that preceded the action, the influences of past conditioning, and the specific circumstances that were present. This understanding helps transform vague, global guilt, I'm a terrible person, into specific awareness. I acted harmfully when I was feeling threatened and didn't pause to consider the consequences. Buddhist ethics then emphasizes making amends when possible. This might involve apologizing to those harmed, offering appropriate restitution, or in cases where direct amends aren't possible, performing acts of generosity or service that counterbalance the harmful action. These concrete steps help transform guilty energy into constructive action rather than leaving it to fester as ongoing self-recrimination. Perhaps most importantly, Buddhist ethics emphasizes learning from unskillful actions and committing to more wholesome choices moving forward. Rather than being defined by past mistakes, we use them as valuable feedback that helps refine our understanding and behavior. This future-oriented focus prevents guilt from becoming a stagnant pool of self-judgment and transforms it into a catalyst for growth. For shame, that more global sense of being fundamentally flawed or unworthy, Buddhist ethics offers particularly powerful medicine. The entire framework of Buddhist practice rests on the understanding that all beings possess the capacity for awakening. Our unskillful actions and harmful tendencies are seen not as evidence of inherent badness, but as temporary obscurations that can be gradually cleared through practice and awareness. This perspective dramatically shifts how we relate to our moral failings. Rather than seeing them as confirmation of some fundamental flaw, we recognize them as the natural result of confusion, conditioning, and unawareness, all of which can be transformed through practice. Our worth isn't diminished by past mistakes, nor is it established by perfect behavior. It's inherent in our very nature and cannot be lost regardless of what we've done or failed to do. The practice of Buddhist ethics also helps address shame by providing concrete actions that align our behavior with our deeper values. When shame leads to withdrawal and isolation, ethical practice encourages engagement and connection. Simple acts like speaking truthfully, acting with generosity, or refraining from harm help rebuild trust in ourselves and create evidence that counters shame's global negative judgments. Buddhist ethics particularly emphasizes the role of intention in determining the skillfulness of actions. This focus helps refine our moral sensitivity without falling into rigid perfectionism that fuels shame. We learn to recognize that most harmful actions stem not from inherent evil, but from confusion, fear, or misguided attempts to meet legitimate needs. This understanding fosters self-compassion while still taking responsibility for our choices and their effects. The community aspect of Buddhist practice also plays an important role in working with guilt and shame. In traditional settings, practitioners take refuge in the Sangha, spiritual community, and find support in knowing that others are engaged in the same process of moral development. This counters the isolation that shame creates by helping us recognize the universality of moral struggles and the possibility of growth and transformation. Meditation and mindfulness practices support ethical development by helping us recognize unskillful impulses before they lead to harmful actions. Through regular practice, we develop the capacity to notice anger, greed, or delusion arising and choose not to act from these states. This growing self-awareness reduces the accumulation of new regrets while building confidence in our capacity for choice and change. For those working with particularly intense shame or guilt from past actions, Buddhist practices of forgiveness can be especially healing. These involve acknowledging the harm done, taking responsibility, and then consciously releasing yourself from ongoing self-punishment, recognizing that continuing to torture yourself mentally serves no one and prevents genuine growth and repair. The Buddhist approach to ethics and moral development offers a balanced middle way between two unhelpful extremes: harsh self-judgment that leads to shame and moral paralysis on one hand, and denial or rationalization of harmful behavior on the other. It encourages honest acknowledgement of unskillful actions while maintaining faith in our fundamental capacity for awakening and transformation. Through consistent practice of Buddhist ethics, many people find that guilt gradually transforms from a heavy, immobilizing weight into a sensitive internal compass that guides behavior with increasing subtlety. Shame's global attack on self-worth progressively gives way to specific, constructive awareness of areas for growth, rather than being defined by past mistakes or trapped in cycles of self-recrimination. We develop the capacity to learn from all experiences and continuously refine our understanding and behavior. The Buddhist approach to ethics provides practical tools for working with emotions like guilt and shame, but to develop a more comprehensive understanding of our emotional life, we need to examine the underlying structures through which emotions arise and take hold of us. This is where the Buddha's teaching on the 5 aggregates offers profound insights into the nature of emotional identification. The 5 aggregates, or in Pali, khandhas, represent the Buddha's analysis of what we typically consider to be our self or personal identity. These 5 components include form, our physical body; sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings; perceptions, the recognition or labeling of experiences; mental formations, thoughts, emotions, and volitions; and consciousness, awareness of the other 4 aggregates. According to Buddhist psychology, what we call I or me is actually a dynamic process involving these 5 aspects of experience rather than a solid, unchanging entity. This framework is particularly helpful for understanding how emotions become problematic. When we experience a strong emotion like anger, we typically identify completely with it. I am angry. This complete identification makes the emotion seem solid, permanent, and central to who we are. The five aggregates model helps us deconstruct this experience, seeing it instead as a temporary configuration of these five aspects of our being. Let's look at how an emotion like anxiety might be understood through this lens. On the physical level, form. Anxiety manifests as bodily sensations, perhaps a racing heart, shallow breathing, or tension in the shoulders. At the level of sensations, there's likely an unpleasant feeling tone. Perceptions might include interpreting neutral situations as threatening or recognizing patterns that trigger anxiety. Mental formations include the worried thoughts, mental images of feared outcomes, and the emotion of anxiety itself. Consciousness is the awareness that knows all these components. By breaking down an emotional experience in this way, we begin to see that what seemed like a solid state, I am anxious, is actually a complex, fluid process made up of these different elements. None of these elements alone is anxiety, and none of them is me. This insight creates space between our awareness and the emotional experience, reducing identification and enabling a more skillful response. The Buddha specifically taught that none of the five aggregates should be regarded as self. When we closely examine each aggregate, we find that none of them can truly be controlled or possessed the way we assume a self should be. The body ages and changes despite our wishes. Sensations arise based on contact with objects, not through our command. Perceptions form based on past conditioning. Mental formations, including emotions, arise due to countless causes and conditions. And consciousness itself depends on the other aggregates. It's not an independent self. This teaching directly addresses the way we typically relate to emotions. We often believe that our emotions define us. I'm an angry person, or I've always been anxious. Through the lens of the five aggregates, we can see that emotions are conditioned processes rather than fixed attributes of a self. This doesn't mean emotions aren't real or significant. It means they're not who we fundamentally are. Meditation on the five aggregates involves systematically examining each component of experience. When a strong emotion arises, we might begin by noting the physical sensations associated with it, observing their changing nature. We then notice the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling tone that accompanies the emotion. We become aware of how we're perceiving the situation and what labels we're applying. We observe the thoughts, images, and emotional energies arising as mental formations. And we recognize the quality of awareness itself that knows all these aspects. This detailed observation reveals something crucial about emotions. They're not monolithic states, but complex processes with multiple components, each changing moment by moment. The physical sensations of fear might shift from racing heart to butterflies in the stomach to tension in the jaw. The thoughts accompanying anger might move from blame to justification to consideration of consequences. By seeing these changes directly, we begin to experience emotions as fluid rather than solid. This practice doesn't aim to eliminate emotions or create detachment from life. Rather, it fosters a healthier relationship with emotional experience, one characterized by clarity, balance, and non-identification. We can fully experience anger, for instance, while recognizing this is anger arising due to conditions, rather than I am an angry person. This shift in perspective creates space for wise response rather than automatic reaction. The five aggregates analysis is particularly helpful for working with emotions we find ourselves repeatedly stuck in or defined by. If you've always thought of yourself as an anxious person, for instance, The five aggregates perspective invites you to see anxiety not as your identity, but as a recurring pattern of physical sensations, unpleasant feeling tones, threat-oriented perceptions, worried thoughts, and awareness of all these. This more nuanced understanding helps loosen the grip of self-definition that can make emotional patterns seem fixed and inevitable. Buddhist texts compare this insight to watching a movie. When fully absorbed in a film, we react emotionally as if the events on screen are real and happening to us. When we remember it's just images projected on a screen, we still might feel emotions, but we're not completely identified with or controlled by them. Similarly, seeing emotions through the lens of the five aggregates allows us to experience them fully while maintaining a certain freedom from their grip. This analysis also helps us understand why certain emotions seem to persist or recur. Each component of the five aggregates can reinforce the others in feedback loops. Anxious thoughts trigger physical tension, which creates unpleasant sensations, which reinforce the perception of threat, which generates more anxious thoughts. By recognizing these interconnected processes, we can intervene at various points in the cycle, perhaps using breath awareness to calm physical symptoms, or mindfulness of thoughts to recognize catastrophizing before it intensifies the emotion. Working with emotions through the five aggregates framework requires patience and consistent practice. It's not about analyzing or intellectualizing our experiences, but developing direct, experiential insight into how emotions operate. This insight naturally loosens the grip of identification, allowing emotions to move through us more freely without defining or controlling us. Many practitioners find it helpful to start with milder emotional states before applying this approach to more intense or challenging emotions. You might begin by observing happiness, interest, or mild irritation through this lens before working with stronger states like rage, deep grief, or intense fear. As familiarity with the practice grows, you can gradually apply it to a wider range of emotional experiences. The understanding gained through this practice doesn't just liberate us from difficult emotions, it also transforms our relationship with positive states. Even joy, love, or peace can become sources of suffering if we grasp at them as permanent possessions or essential aspects of self. By recognizing all emotional states as processes rather than possessions, we can enjoy positive experiences fully while not becoming destabilized when they naturally change. While the five aggregates offer a framework for understanding and working with emotions as they arise, some situations call for more active practices that directly transform difficult emotions into sources of compassion and connection. This is where Tonglen meditation, a Tibetan Buddhist practice of taking and sending, provides a powerful complementary approach. Tonglen represents a radical departure from our usual emotional habits. Typically, we try to push away unpleasant experiences while grasping at pleasant ones, a strategy the Buddha identified as a primary cause of suffering. Tonglen deliberately reverses this pattern. In this practice, we visualize taking in suffering, our own and others, with each inhalation, and sending out relief, healing, and happiness with each exhalation. This counterintuitive approach directly challenges our aversion to difficult emotions and experiences. Rather than trying to protect ourselves from suffering, which often creates additional tension and resistance, we willingly open to it, transforming it through our compassionate awareness. This doesn't mean wallowing in negativity, but rather developing the confidence that our hearts are spacious enough to accommodate suffering without being overcome by it. The basic practice of Tonglen begins with a comfortable sitting position and a few moments of settling the mind. You then bring to mind someone who's suffering. It could be yourself, a loved one facing difficulties, or even a stranger whose pain you're aware of. As you inhale, you visualize their suffering as a dark dot, heavy substance, often imagined as smoke or pollution, that you breathe directly into your heart. Rather than rejecting this suffering, you open to it completely. Then, as you exhale, You imagine transforming that suffering into relief, healing, light, or whatever the person needs, sending it out to them with your out-breath. There's no need to explain or understand exactly how this transformation occurs. The willingness to take in pain and send out relief is itself the transformative element. You continue this rhythm of breathing in suffering and breathing out relief for several minutes. What makes Tonglen particularly powerful for emotional transformation is how it directly works with the energy of difficult emotions rather than trying to suppress or escape them. If you're experiencing anger, for instance, traditional Tonglen practice would have you breathe in not just your own anger, but the anger of all beings, acknowledging the universal nature of this emotion. As you exhale, you send out patience, understanding, and peace to all who struggle with anger. This practice counteracts the isolating effect of difficult emotions. When we're caught in strong negative feelings, we often feel uniquely afflicted or separated from others. Tonglen reminds us that millions of others are experiencing similar emotions at this very moment. By connecting our personal struggle with this universal experience, the emotion becomes a bridge to compassion rather than a wall of separation. Tonglen is particularly effective for working with emotions like grief, fear, or physical pain that we typically try to avoid. By intentionally breathing in these experiences, first our own, then gradually expanding to include others with similar struggles, we develop a courageous heart that can stay present with difficulty rather than contracting around it. This expanded capacity serves us not just in formal practice, but in all life situations where we encounter suffering. The practice can be adjusted to work with specific emotional challenges. If you're dealing with persistent self-criticism, for example, you might breathe in the pain of harsh self-judgment that you and countless others experience, and breathe out self-acceptance and kindness to all who struggle to treat themselves gently. If anxiety is prominent, you breathe in the anxious suffering of yourself and all beings, and breathe out confidence, safety, and ease. Neurologically, Tonglen works with our innate capacity for empathy while adding the crucial element of active compassion. Research in contemplative neuroscience suggests that practices like Tonglen activate brain regions associated with both empathic resonance and positive emotional states, helping transform the potential burnout of empathy into the renewable resource of compassion. Many practitioners find that Tonglen creates a profound shift in how they relate to difficult situations. Rather than automatically seeing challenges as obstacles to happiness, they begin to recognize them as opportunities to develop compassion and wisdom. A difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice Tonglen for all who struggle with communication. Physical pain becomes an opportunity to connect with all beings experiencing similar discomfort. For those new to the practice, it's often helpful to start with situations where compassion arises naturally, perhaps a child who is hurt or a beloved pet in distress. As you become comfortable with the basic exchange of taking in suffering and sending out relief, you can gradually work with more challenging scenarios, including your own difficult emotions and eventually people with whom you have conflict. Some practitioners worry that taking in others' suffering might overwhelm them or somehow increase the total suffering in the world. The Tibetan tradition addresses this concern by emphasizing that we're working with the experience of suffering, not the actual causes of suffering. We don't take on others' karma or problems in a literal sense, but rather open our hearts to the reality of suffering while cultivating the wish for its relief. Far from being overwhelmed, regular practitioners typically report feeling more spacious, resourceful, and emotionally resilient. The transformative power of Tonglen extends beyond formal meditation sessions. Many practitioners incorporate abbreviated versions into daily life, using challenging encounters as reminders to practice. Stuck in a frustrating traffic jam? Breathe in the impatience of everyone around you. Breathe out patience and ease. Dealing with a difficult colleague? Breathe in their frustration and your own reactive emotions. Breathe out understanding and clarity. Over time, Tonglen practice gradually rewires our emotional responses. Instead of automatically contracting around pain and grasping at pleasure, reactions that often intensify suffering, we develop the capacity to meet all experiences with an open period. Compassionate awareness. Difficult emotions become doorways to deeper connection rather than obstacles to overcome. This transformed relationship with our emotional life represents one of Buddhism's most profound offerings for psychological well-being and spiritual growth. The practice of Tonglen shows us how to transform our relationship with difficult emotions by moving toward them with compassion rather than away from them with aversion. This approach points to a fundamental principle in Buddhist emotional healing, the art of letting go. In Pali, this concept is called nekkhamma, often translated as renunciation or relinquishment, and it represents one of the most misunderstood yet powerful aspects of Buddhist practice. When we hear letting go in relation to emotions, many people immediately think it means suppressing feelings or pretending they don't exist. This couldn't be further from the truth. Buddhist letting go isn't about denying or pushing away emotional experience, but rather about releasing our tendency to grasp at emotions, identify with them, or be defined by them. It's about changing our relationship with emotions, not eliminating them. Think of how we typically handle emotions. When pleasant feelings arise, joy, excitement, pleasure, we tend to cling to them, trying to make them last longer or occur more frequently. When unpleasant emotions appear, anger, fear, sadness, we often resist them, trying to make them go away or blaming ourselves for experiencing them. In both cases, we're engaging in a form of emotional grasping that actually prolongs and intensifies our suffering. Letting go involves recognizing this pattern and deliberately practicing a different response. When a pleasant emotion arises, we fully experience it without trying to hold on to it or make it permanent. When an unpleasant emotion appears, we acknowledge it without resistance, knowing that it too will pass in its own time. This balanced approach allows emotions to flow through us naturally, without causing the additional suffering that comes from clinging or aversion. This practice sounds simple, but runs counter to deeply ingrained habits. Most of us have spent a lifetime trying to control our emotional landscape, maximizing pleasant feelings and minimizing unpleasant ones. We've developed countless strategies for this purpose, from substance use to endless distraction, from denial to rumination. Letting go asks us to do something radical, to stop trying to control our emotional experience and instead allow it to be as it is. The Buddha taught that letting go occurs naturally when we observe our emotions with full awareness. When we bring mindful attention to anger, for example, we begin to notice its impermanent nature, how it arises due to certain conditions, changes in intensity and quality moment by moment, and eventually passes away. We see how our thoughts fuel the emotion, how physical sensations accompany it, and how our identification with it, I am angry, makes it seem more solid and lasting than it actually is. This clear seeing naturally loosens our grip, just as we would naturally release a hot coal when we become fully aware of how it's burning our hand. We naturally release our fixation on emotions when we clearly see how our identification with them creates suffering. This doesn't happen through force or suppression, but through the wisdom that comes from direct observation. Buddhist texts offer numerous specific contemplations and practices designed to cultivate this capacity for letting go. One traditional approach involves reflecting on impermanence, regularly reminding ourselves that all emotions, regardless of their intensity, are temporary states that arise and pass away according to conditions. By repeatedly observing this truth in our direct experience, we gradually stop mistaking temporary states for permanent realities. Another powerful practice involves noticing the space around emotional experiences. Even during intense emotions, there are moments of reprieve, brief intervals where the emotion subsides slightly before arising again. By bringing attention to these gaps, we begin to recognize that our awareness is more spacious than any emotion that moves through it. This perspective helps us stop identifying completely with emotional states, creating room for a more balanced response. The practice of letting go reveals an interesting paradox. Emotions often move through us more quickly when we stop resisting them. Many of us have had the experience of trying desperately to get rid of a feeling like anxiety, only to have it intensify and persist. Yet when we finally stop fighting and simply allow the anxiety to be present, it often begins to shift and dissolve on its own. This doesn't mean the emotion disappears instantly. Some feelings, especially those connected to deep loss or trauma, naturally take time to process. But our resistance generally prolongs this natural cycle rather than shortening it. This approach to emotions requires developing trust in our innate capacity to handle the full range of human feelings. Many of us doubt this capacity, fearing that certain emotions will overwhelm us if we don't keep them at bay. The gradual practice of letting go helps build confidence that we can indeed stay present with difficult feelings without being destroyed or defined by them. Each time we successfully ride the wave of an emotion without suppressing or acting out, this confidence grows. The Buddhist tradition emphasizes that letting go isn't something we do once and complete. It's an ongoing practice that we apply again and again as emotions arise throughout our lives. Even advanced practitioners don't reach a state where they never get caught in emotional reactivity. The difference is that they recognize when it's happening sooner, don't judge themselves for it, and have developed the skills to return to a more spacious awareness more quickly. In daily life, the practice of letting go might look like pausing when you notice anger arising, taking a breath, and consciously releasing your grip on the narrative that's fueling the emotion. It might involve recognizing when you're trying to chase after or recreate a pleasant experience rather than simply appreciating it and allowing it to be as it is. It could mean noticing when you're resisting sadness by staying busy or distracted, and instead creating some time to simply sit with the feeling, allowing it to move through you naturally. Many people find it helpful to use simple phrases as reminders of this practice. When caught in a difficult emotion, you might silently note, letting go of resistance, or allowing this to be as it is. With pleasant states, you might remind yourself, enjoying without clinging, or nothing to hold on to here. These mental notes help interrupt our habitual patterns of grasping and aversion, creating space for a more balanced relationship with our emotional life. The ultimate insight that comes through consistent practice of letting go is that emotional freedom doesn't come from controlling our experiences, but from changing our relationship with them. We discover that what causes suffering isn't the emotions themselves, but our desperate attempts to grasp pleasant ones and push away unpleasant ones. As we gradually release these habits, we find an emotional resilience and well-being that doesn't depend on circumstances being a particular way. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. In fact, many practitioners find that letting go of emotional reactivity allows them to respond more effectively to challenging situations. When we're not caught in resistance or attachment to our emotional states, we can see more clearly what action, if any, would be most beneficial. We can make choices based on wisdom and compassion rather than being driven by automatic emotional reactions. The practice of letting go teaches us something profound about the nature of emotions. They have their own natural life cycle when we don't interfere with excessive grasping or aversion. Just as a wave naturally rises, crests, and subsides on the ocean, emotions naturally arise, peak, and pass away when allowed to follow their course. Our job isn't to create or eliminate emotional waves, but to learn to surf them skillfully, staying upright and balanced as they move through us. While letting go focuses on our relationship with emotions as they arise in everyday experience. Some emotional patterns are so deeply ingrained that they require a more profound level of understanding to transform. This is where the Buddhist teaching on emptiness, or sunyata, provides powerful insights for liberation from emotional reactivity. Emptiness in Buddhism doesn't mean nothingness or void, a common misunderstanding that can make this teaching seem nihilistic or depressing. Rather, it points to the fact that nothing exists in the way we typically think it does, as a solid, independent, permanent entity. All phenomena, including our emotions, are empty of inherent, independent existence. They arise dependently, based on countless causes and conditions, without a fixed essence or core. This might sound abstract, but it has direct, practical implications for our emotional life. When strong emotions like anger arise, we typically experience them as solid, real entities that exist from their own side. My anger feels like a thing that has taken possession of me, with its own power and reality. The insight of emptiness reveals that what we call anger is actually a complex, dynamic process dependent on many factors: our physical state, memories, interpretations of events, cultural conditioning, recent experiences, and countless other conditions. Understanding emotions through the lens of emptiness doesn't mean they don't exist or aren't experienced. It means they don't exist in the fixed, solid way we normally perceive them. They're more like weather patterns than solid objects, processes that arise, change, and dissipate based on conditions, without an independent self-nature. This shift in perception can be profoundly liberating when dealing with difficult emotions. Let's look at how this might work with a common emotion like anger. When anger arises, our typical experience involves complete identification with the emotion. I am angry. Belief in our anger-driven thoughts, he shouldn't have done that, and a sense that the anger is a real entity that has taken hold of us. From the perspective of emptiness, we begin to see all the components that have come together to create this experience, perhaps lack of sleep, a previous unrelated frustration, our interpretation of someone's behavior, cultural messages about how to respond to perceived slights, and so on. As we recognize these various conditions, the anger doesn't disappear, but it begins to feel less solid and absolute. We might still feel the bodily sensations and energetic charge of anger, but we're less likely to be completely identified with it or to act it out in harmful ways. We see it as a temporary constellation of conditions rather than an inherent, fixed aspect of ourselves or reality. This perspective is particularly helpful for working with recurring emotional patterns that seem to define us. Many people carry labels like "I'm an anxious person" or "I have anger issues," as if these emotions were fixed, inherent aspects of their identity. The understanding of emptiness helps us recognize that no emotion, no matter how frequently it appears, is an essential part of who we are. Each instance of anxiety or anger is a fresh arising dependent on current conditions, not the manifestation of some fixed emotional identity. Contemplating the emptiness of emotions involves bringing close attention to how they actually form in our experience. When a strong emotion arises, we might investigate what bodily sensations are present, what thoughts or interpretations are occurring, what past experiences are being activated, what external conditions have contributed to this arising. This detailed observation reveals how the seemingly solid emotion is actually a process involving many factors, none of which alone constitutes the emotion. This doesn't mean we intellectually analyze our emotions to death or try to explain them away. The insight into emptiness is experiential, not merely conceptual. It comes from directly observing how emotions form, peak, and subside in our lived experience, noticing their dependent nature and lack of solid essence. This direct seeing gradually transforms our relationship with emotions at a fundamental level. One powerful way to work with emptiness in relation to emotions is to notice the space or gap between the triggering event and our emotional response. In that space lies our freedom to respond differently. The recognition that emotions don't automatically or inherently arise from situations but depend on our interpretations and mental habits gives us more choice in how we respond. We begin to see that, while we can't always control external circumstances, we have considerable influence over the conditions that contribute to our emotional responses. The understanding of emptiness also helps us work with emotions without suppressing or acting them out, two common pitfalls in emotional management. When we see that emotions are neither solid entities to be eliminated nor fixed aspects of self that must be expressed, we can allow them to arise and pass naturally in awareness, responding with wisdom rather than reactivity. The emotion can be fully experienced without defining or controlling us. Many practitioners find that contemplating emptiness creates a profound shift in how they experience challenging emotions. Rather than being trapped inside a solid, all-consuming emotional state, they begin to experience emotions as more transparent and workable. The physical sensations, thoughts, and energies that make up an emotional experience are still present, but they're held in a more spacious awareness that isn't completely identified with or controlled by them. In practical terms, this understanding might manifest as the ability to experience anger fully while recognizing this is a complex process of sensations, thoughts, and energies arising due to multiple conditions, rather than I am an angry person and my anger is justified. It might appear as the capacity to feel anxiety without concluding something is wrong with me or this feeling will never end. The emotion itself might still be intense, but our relationship with it has fundamentally changed. Scientific research in neuroscience and psychology increasingly supports the Buddhist insight into the constructed, dependent nature of emotions. Studies show that emotional experiences involve complex interactions between bodily sensations, cognitive appraisals, cultural frameworks, and other factors, none of which alone constitutes the emotion. This modern understanding aligns remarkably well with the ancient wisdom of emptiness. For those new to this concept, it can be helpful to start with simple practices that highlight the constructed nature of experience. You might experiment with how different interpretations of the same event lead to different emotional responses, or notice how your emotional state shifts based on physical factors like hunger or tiredness. These observations begin to reveal the dependent, non-inherent nature of emotions that the teaching on emptiness points to more profoundly. The ultimate value of understanding emptiness isn't just philosophical insight, but practical liberation from the grip of emotional reactivity. When we no longer mistake emotions for solid, inherent realities or fixed aspects of self, we naturally respond to them with more wisdom and less identification. This doesn't mean we become emotionally flat or disconnected from experience. Quite the opposite. We can engage fully with the richness of emotional life while no longer being controlled by it, finding freedom right in the midst of our human vulnerability and sensitivity. Understanding emptiness helps us recognize the constructed nature of our emotions. But sometimes we need more embodied, physical approaches for working with difficult feelings. This is especially true when emotions become so intense that sitting meditation feels overwhelming or impossible. In these moments, Buddhist walking meditation Kinhin offers an accessible and powerful alternative for processing emotional turbulence while staying present and aware. Walking meditation bridges the gap between formal meditation practice and everyday life. Unlike sitting meditation, which can sometimes feel removed from our active experience, walking meditation directly incorporates physical movement, something we do every day. This accessibility makes it particularly valuable for working with emotions that contain significant physical energy or restlessness that makes sitting still challenging. The practice is deceptively simple. You begin by standing still and bringing awareness to the sensations of your body, the feeling of your feet making contact with the ground, the subtle shifts in balance, the natural rhythm of your breathing. Then you start to walk, much more slowly than your normal pace, bringing detailed attention to the physical sensations involved in each step. You might notice the lifting of the foot, the moving forward, the placing down, and the shifting of weight, all as distinct phases of what we usually experience as a single, automatic action. What makes walking meditation especially effective for processing difficult emotions is how it harnesses the body's natural wisdom. Our emotions aren't just mental events, they're deeply physical experiences involving hormones, nervous system activation, and muscular responses. When we feel angry, anxious, or grief-stricken, these emotions manifest physically as tension, restlessness, heaviness, or constriction. Walking meditation allows us to work directly with these physical manifestations while maintaining mindful awareness. For instance, if you're experiencing anxiety with its characteristic restless energy, sitting meditation might feel like trying to contain a volcano, almost impossible and potentially increasing the pressure. Walking meditation offers a middle path, neither suppressing this energy nor being controlled by it. The rhythmic movement provides an appropriate channel for the physical energy, while the focused attention prevents it from spiraling into worried thinking or physical tension. Similarly, emotions like grief or sadness often create a heavy, weighted feeling in the body. The simple act of walking with awareness can help prevent this heaviness from becoming complete immobility or depression. The gentle movement reminds us that even amid profound sadness, life continues to flow and move forward, one step at a time. The practice is highly adaptable to different emotional states and environments. You can practice formal walking meditation in a dedicated space, perhaps walking back and forth along a short path or in a circle, bringing extremely detailed attention to each movement. Or you can practice more informally while walking in nature, in your neighborhood, or even down a hallway at work, adjusting your pace and focus to suit the situation while maintaining the essential quality of present moment awareness. When practicing walking meditation specifically for emotional processing, it's helpful to begin by acknowledging the emotion that's present. You might silently name it, anger is here or grief is present, without judgment or elaboration. Then, as you begin walking, bring attention to how this emotion manifests in your body. Where do you feel it most strongly? How does it affect your walking, making it faster, slower, heavier, or uneven? Rather than trying to change these effects, simply observe them with kind awareness. As you continue walking mindfully, you may notice how the physical experience of the emotion begins to shift. What initially felt like an overwhelming wave of anger might break down into distinct sensations: heat in the face, tightness in the chest, a forward lean in your posture. By staying with these physical manifestations rather than the narrative about why you're angry, the emotion begins to move and change rather than staying fixed and solid. The rhythmic nature of walking also helps interrupt the circular thinking patterns that often accompany difficult emotions. When we're caught in anxiety, for instance, our thoughts typically race in repetitive loops of worry about the future. The steady pace of mindful walking, combined with attention to physical sensations, naturally pulls us out of these mental loops and back into present moment experience. Each step becomes an anchor for awareness, just as the breath serves as an anchor in sitting meditation. Buddhist traditions often incorporate specific contemplations into walking meditation that can be particularly helpful for emotional processing. For example, you might coordinate affirming phrases with your steps. Breathing in, I know I am walking. Breathing out, I am here now. These simple phrases help maintain present moment awareness while gently redirecting attention from emotional reactivity to direct experience. For those dealing with intense emotions related to past trauma or deep grief, walking meditation offers a gentler entry point to mindfulness than sitting practice. The natural regulation that comes through rhythmic movement helps keep the nervous system within its window of tolerance, preventing both overwhelm and shutdown. This makes it possible to process difficult emotions gradually, in manageable doses, rather than being flooded by them. Walking meditation doesn't need to be practiced in isolation from other approaches. Many practitioners find it helpful to alternate between sitting and walking meditation, especially during retreats or intensive practice periods. The walking periods help process and integrate insights or emotions that arise during sitting, while also relieving physical tension and restoring energy. This balanced approach acknowledges the importance of both stillness and movement in our emotional processing. The benefits of walking meditation for emotional well-being extend beyond the formal practice itself. By learning to maintain mindful awareness while in motion, we develop the capacity to stay present with our emotions even as we move through daily activities. The line between meditation and daily life begins to blur, as we bring the same quality of present moment awareness to emotions that arise while working, socializing, or handling life's challenges. This integration of practice and daily life is particularly valuable for sustainable emotional healing. While retreats or formal practice sessions provide important dedicated time for emotional processing, most of our lives are spent in activity. Learning to work with emotions while in motion, literally and figuratively, creates a practical approach to emotional well-being that doesn't depend on perfect conditions or special environments. Many long-term practitioners report that walking meditation becomes an instinctive response to emotional turbulence. Rather than immediately reaching for distractions or getting caught in emotional reactions, they naturally find themselves slowing down, becoming more embodied, and bringing mindful awareness to both their movement and their emotional experience. This represents a profound shift from being controlled by emotions to having genuine choice in how we respond to them. Walking meditation offers a powerful reminder that emotional healing doesn't require extraordinary methods or perfect conditions. It can happen through ordinary activities infused with extraordinary awareness. By bringing mindful presence to the simple act of walking, we transform a basic human movement into a vehicle for emotional liberation and embodied wisdom. While walking meditation provides an embodied approach to working with emotions in the moment, Buddhism also offers a comprehensive framework for cultivating positive emotional qualities that serve as direct antidotes to negative states. This framework, known as the Four Immeasurables or Brahmaviharas, consists of 4 qualities of heart that can be systematically developed through meditation and daily practice: loving kindness, metta; compassion, karuna; appreciative joy, mudita; and equanimity, upekkha. What makes the 4 immeasurables particularly effective for emotional transformation is how each quality serves as a specific antidote for particular negative emotions. They don't just replace negative states in a general way. They directly address and transform the energy of specific difficult emotions into their positive counterparts. Loving kindness serves as the direct antidote to anger, hatred, and ill will. When we're caught in anger, our hearts contract around the desire to harm or push away whoever we perceive as threatening or offensive. Loving kindness practice deliberately cultivates the opposite intention, the sincere wish for well-being and happiness for ourselves and others, including those we find difficult. By repeatedly practicing this positive intention, we gradually retrain the heart's default response from hostility to goodwill. For example, if you find yourself regularly angry with a particular colleague, traditional loving-kindness practice would involve deliberately sending wishes for their well-being. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. This doesn't mean approving of harmful behavior or bypassing legitimate concerns. Rather, it recognizes that carrying hatred harms us more than anyone else, and that even difficult people share the basic human desire to be happy and free from suffering. Compassion functions as the antidote to cruelty and the desire to harm. While this might seem like an extreme emotion that few people experience, subtler forms of cruelty appear in our everyday judgments, gossip, and willingness to see others suffer for their perceived mistakes. Compassion practice cultivates the opposite response, the sincere wish for suffering to be relieved, coupled with the willingness to help where possible. When we notice ourselves enjoying someone else's misfortune or thinking they deserved it, compassion practice invites us to touch into our shared vulnerability. We recognize that, like us, all beings wish to avoid suffering, and we deliberately cultivate the wish for their relief. This might take the form of phrases like, "May your suffering be eased," May you find peace. May you be free from harm. With practice, this compassionate response begins to arise naturally in situations where we previously might have felt indifference or even satisfaction at others' difficulties. Appreciative joy counteracts envy, jealousy, and resentment at others' good fortune. These emotions arise from the mistaken perception that others' happiness somehow diminishes our own, as if happiness were a limited resource that gets depleted when others receive it. Appreciative joy practice deliberately celebrates others' happiness, success, and good qualities, recognizing that joy multiplies when shared rather than diminished. This practice is especially valuable in competitive environments like workplaces or academic settings, where others' success can easily trigger feelings of inadequacy or resentment. When a colleague receives recognition or achieves something significant, appreciative joy practice involves deliberately cultivating thoughts like, "How wonderful that they're experiencing success. May their happiness continue and increase." With consistent practice, what initially might feel forced gradually becomes a genuine capacity to take pleasure in others' well-being. Equanimity serves as the antidote to both grasping attachment and aversive rejection. It's the quality of mind that remains balanced and steady regardless of whether experiences are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Equanimity doesn't mean not caring or being indifferent, it means caring in a way that isn't thrown off balance by changing circumstances or preferences. This quality is particularly valuable for working with strong desires and aversions. When we're caught in craving for particular experiences or outcomes, equanimity practice reminds us of the bigger picture. All beings are owners of their karma. Their happiness depends on their actions, not on my wishes for them. Similarly, when facing situations or people we find difficult, equanimity helps us maintain perspective. This too will change. Can I meet this moment with steadiness rather than rejection? The Buddhist tradition offers specific meditation practices for developing each of these qualities, typically beginning with oneself and gradually expanding to include increasingly challenging people and situations. For instance, loving-kindness meditation traditionally starts with directing good wishes toward yourself, then a benefactor, a friend, a neutral person, a difficult person, and finally, all beings everywhere. These practices aren't meant to replace or suppress natural emotional responses, but rather to cultivate positive qualities that gradually transform our emotional tendencies. It's like strengthening a muscle. The more we practice generating these positive states, the more readily they arise in challenging situations and the less we're controlled by their negative counterparts. The four immeasurables are called immeasurable because they can be developed infinitely and extended to countless beings. Unlike material resources that get depleted when shared, these heart qualities actually increase through practice and expression. The more loving kindness we generate, the more capacity for kindness we develop. The more compassion we express, the deeper our compassionate resources grow. Scientific research increasingly validates the effectiveness of these practices. Studies show that regular meditation on the four immeasurables leads to measurable changes in brain function, including increased activation in areas associated with positive emotions and empathy, and decreased activity in regions linked to stress and negativity. Other research demonstrates improvements in immune function, cardiovascular health, and overall well-being among regular practitioners. What makes these practices particularly valuable for emotional transformation is their systematic, comprehensive nature. Rather than addressing negative emotions in a piecemeal fashion, the four immeasurables offer a complete framework for cultivating a balanced, positive emotional life. Loving kindness ensures our hearts remain open and warm. Compassion keeps us responsive to suffering. Appreciative joy allows us to celebrate life's pleasant aspects. Equanimity provides stability amid life's inevitable changes. In daily life, these practices can be integrated informally throughout the day. When someone irritates you, you might silently offer them loving kindness. When you notice suffering, you can respond with compassion. When good things happen to others, you can deliberately celebrate with appreciative joy. When facing uncertainty or difficulty, you can call on equanimity to maintain perspective and balance. With consistent practice, the four immeasurables gradually become your heart's default setting rather than states you have to deliberately generate. You begin to spontaneously respond to life's challenges with these positive qualities rather than being driven by their negative counterparts. This represents a profound transformation of your emotional landscape, not through suppression or denial of difficult emotions, but through the cultivation of their positive alternatives. The systematic development of these positive qualities creates an internal environment where negative emotions have less room to take hold and flourish. Just as a garden fully planted with beneficial plants has less space for weeds to grow, a heart cultivated with the four immeasurables naturally experiences fewer destructive emotions. When difficult emotions do arise, they find themselves in a container of greater awareness, compassion, and balance, allowing them to move through without causing lasting harm. The four immeasurables provide a framework for cultivating positive emotional qualities. But Buddhism also recognizes that our emotional well-being isn't solely determined by our meditation practice. It's profoundly influenced by what we consume, not just the food we eat, but everything we take into our bodies and minds. This is where the Buddhist practice of mindful consumption offers valuable insights for addressing emotional eating, substance use, and other behaviors we often turn to when trying to manage difficult emotions. The Buddha emphasized the importance of mindful consumption in many teachings, noting that what we allow into our body and mind directly shapes our consciousness and emotional state. He encouraged practitioners to observe carefully how different inputs affect their mental and emotional well-being, whether those inputs are food, drink, conversations, entertainment, or information. This careful observation serves as the foundation for making wiser choices about what we consume. Many of us use consumption, especially of food, alcohol, digital media, or shopping, as an unconscious strategy to regulate our emotions. We reach for sweets when feeling sad, alcohol when anxious, endless social media scrolling when bored, or compulsive shopping when feeling empty. These behaviors don't necessarily constitute formal addictions, but they represent a common pattern of trying to manage emotional discomfort through external consumption rather than direct awareness. Buddhist mindful consumption begins with bringing conscious awareness to these patterns, rather than immediately trying to change behaviors that might be deeply ingrained. The practice starts with simply noticing the connections between emotional states and consumption habits. You might observe, for instance, that you tend to overeat when feeling lonely, or reach for your phone whenever anxiety arises. This awareness itself is transformative, creating a small space between emotional trigger and habitual response where choice becomes possible. The next step involves investigating the actual effects of these consumption patterns. Buddhism encourages us to observe directly whether these strategies actually deliver what we're seeking. Does that extra helping of food really alleviate sadness, or just add physical discomfort to the emotional distress? Does scrolling through social media actually relieve boredom, or does it leave you feeling more dissatisfied? Does another drink really reduce anxiety, or just temporarily numb it before it returns stronger later? This honest investigation often reveals that our habitual consumption patterns provide brief relief at best, while frequently creating additional suffering in the long run. This insight doesn't come as an intellectual judgment, but as a direct observation of cause and effect in our own experience. We begin to see clearly how certain forms of consumption, while promising relief, actually perpetuate or intensify emotional suffering. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way is particularly relevant to mindful consumption. He advocated avoiding both extreme indulgence and harsh deprivation, finding instead a balanced approach that supports well-being. This balanced perspective is especially valuable when addressing emotional eating or other consumption habits, as it steers us away from both unrestricted indulgence and rigid, punitive restriction, both of which often lead to cycles of shame and continued suffering. Practically speaking, mindful consumption involves developing greater awareness around the entire process of consumption, from the initial impulse to the after effects. For example, with emotional eating, the practice might involve pausing before eating to check in with your emotional state and physical hunger level. During eating, it means bringing full attention to the sensory experience, the tastes, textures, and sensations of the food. After eating, it includes noticing how different foods affect your physical and emotional state. This heightened awareness naturally leads to more conscious choices that align with genuine well-being rather than momentary escape. It's important to understand that mindful consumption isn't about rigid control or perfect choices. It's about bringing kind awareness to our patterns and gradually making adjustments based on what we observe actually supports our well-being, both immediate and long-term. For more entrenched patterns that might qualify as addictions, whether to substances, behaviors, or thought patterns, Buddhist approaches offer particularly valuable perspectives. Rather than viewing addiction as a moral failing or permanent character flaw, Buddhism sees addictive behaviors as conditioned patterns that can be understood and transformed through awareness, compassion, and appropriate support. Central to the Buddhist approach is recognizing the role of craving in addiction. The Buddha identified craving or thirst, tanha, as the cause of suffering, and this insight applies particularly well to understanding addictive cycles. Addiction involves not just enjoying a substance or behavior, but craving it, feeling that we must have it to be okay. This craving creates a cycle of temporary relief followed by increased suffering that drives further craving. Mindfulness practices help interrupt this cycle by creating awareness of how craving actually operates in our experience. We learn to recognize the physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions that constitute craving, seeing them as temporary phenomena rather than commands that must be obeyed. With practice, we develop the capacity to be with the discomfort of craving without automatically reacting to it, a skill that lies at the heart of recovery. The Buddhist emphasis on understanding underlying causes also helps address the emotional roots of addictive behaviors. Rather than just focusing on the behavior itself, we investigate what emotional needs we're trying to meet through consumption. Are we seeking comfort, escape, excitement, numbing, connection, or relief from specific emotional states? This understanding helps us develop healthier ways to address these legitimate needs without the harmful consequences of addictive consumption. Community support, a key element in Buddhist practice through the concept of Sangha, spiritual community, also plays a vital role in transforming consumption patterns. Many people find that meditation groups, recovery communities, or other supportive gatherings provide essential encouragement and accountability for changing deeply ingrained habits. The knowledge that others understand our struggles and support our efforts creates a container for transformation that is difficult to create alone. Buddhist practice also addresses the shame and self-judgment that often accompany problematic consumption patterns. By cultivating an attitude of compassionate awareness rather than harsh criticism, we create an internal environment where healing becomes possible. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, but rather recognizing that beating ourselves up typically leads to more suffering and often more of the very behavior we're trying to change. For those working with serious addictions, it's important to note that Buddhist approaches can complement but not necessarily replace appropriate medical and psychological treatment. The Buddha himself advocated using skillful means appropriate to each situation, and for many people, this includes professional support alongside contemplative practices. The ultimate goal of mindful consumption isn't perfect control over every input to body and mind. Rather, it's developing the awareness and wisdom to make choices that genuinely nourish well-being rather than momentarily mask suffering. With practice, we learn to distinguish between consumption that supports clarity and emotional balance versus that which clouds awareness and intensifies emotional reactivity. This discernment extends beyond obvious substances to include all forms of consumption, the conversations we engage in, the media we consume, the environments we spend time in, and the thoughts we habitually entertain. As awareness grows, we naturally gravitate toward what truly nourishes and supports emotional well-being, not from rigid discipline, but from clear seeing of what actually creates happiness and what creates suffering. While mindful consumption helps us make wiser choices about what we take in, Buddhist practices of self-compassion address how we relate to ourselves, particularly when we're struggling with difficult emotions or perceived failures. In a culture often dominated by harsh self-criticism and perfectionism, these compassionate approaches offer a radically different way of relating to our own suffering. Self-compassion in Buddhist traditions differs significantly from what many people in Western cultures might assume it means. It's not self-indulgence, making excuses for harmful behavior, or lowering standards. Rather, it's about relating to ourselves with the same kindness, care, and balanced perspective that we would naturally offer to a good friend facing difficulties. It means treating ourselves as worthy of care and understanding, especially when we're struggling. The practice begins with recognizing suffering when it's present. In the Buddhist tradition, this recognition is considered the first step toward compassion. We can't respond compassionately to what we don't acknowledge. Many of us have developed habits of denying, minimizing, or pushing away our own emotional pain. Self-compassion starts with the simple but often challenging step of acknowledging, "This is difficult right now," or "I'm suffering in this moment." This acknowledgement might sound simple, but it represents a significant shift for many people. We're often taught to keep pushing through difficulty without complaint, to focus on the positive, or to compare our suffering with others and conclude we don't have the right to feel bad. Buddhist self-compassion cuts through these barriers, recognizing that suffering deserves compassion wherever it appears, including in our own experience. After recognizing suffering, Buddhist self-compassion practices emphasize our common humanity, understanding that difficulty, failure, and emotional pain are part of the shared human experience, not evidence of personal deficiency. When we make mistakes or experience painful emotions, we often fall into the trap of believing we're uniquely flawed or that others don't struggle in similar ways. This perceived isolation intensifies suffering. Contemplative practices that cultivate awareness of our interconnection with others directly counter this isolating tendency. We reflect on how millions of other humans experience similar struggles, make similar mistakes, and face similar emotional challenges. This perspective doesn't minimize our individual experience but places it within the context of our shared human vulnerability, helping us feel connected rather than isolated in our difficulties. The third component of Buddhist self-compassion involves responding to our suffering with concrete acts of kindness and care. This might include gentle, supportive self-talk, physical self-soothing like placing a hand on the heart, or taking appropriate actions to address our needs, just as we would naturally offer help to a friend in distress. Self-compassion involves actively tending to our own suffering with genuine care. Many specific Buddhist practices support the development of self-compassion. One traditional approach involves using phrases similar to loving-kindness meditation but directed toward oneself, especially during times of difficulty. May I be kind to myself in this suffering. May I give myself the compassion I need. May I learn from this experience and move forward with wisdom. These phrases help counter the self-critical messages that often dominate our internal dialogue. Another powerful practice involves working with an inner critic through compassionate dialogue. When harsh self-judgment arises, we learn to recognize it not as truth, but as a part of our mind trying to help or protect us in a misguided way. Rather than identifying with this critical voice or fighting against it, we relate to it with understanding while also setting appropriate boundaries. This might involve acknowledging, "I hear you're trying to help me improve, but this harsh approach is causing more suffering than growth." Contemporary research strongly supports the benefits of self-compassion practices. Studies show that self-compassion is associated with greater emotional resilience, reduced anxiety and depression, healthier relationships, and even improved physical health markers. Importantly, contrary to common fears, self-compassion doesn't lead to complacency or lowered standards. Research indicates that self-compassionate people are actually more likely to take responsibility for mistakes and make positive changes than those who are harshly self-critical. What makes Buddhist self-compassion particularly powerful is how it transforms our relationship with difficult emotions. Instead of seeing emotions like fear, anger, or sadness as problems to be eliminated, we learn to hold them in compassionate awareness, creating space for them to be felt, understood, and naturally processed. This compassionate presence often allows emotions to move through us more freely, rather than becoming stuck or suppressed. Many practitioners find that self-compassion practices are especially valuable during times of major life challenges, illness, or loss. When facing circumstances we can't control or change, the way we relate to ourselves can make a profound difference in our suffering. Self-compassion doesn't deny painful realities or promise immediate relief, but it does provide a more supportive internal environment for navigating life's inevitable difficulties. The development of self-compassion doesn't happen overnight, particularly for those who have spent years or decades with deeply ingrained self-criticism. It's a gradual process that involves consistently bringing kind awareness to our habitual patterns and intentionally cultivating alternative responses. Many people find it helpful to start with easier situations before applying self-compassion to their most challenging areas of self-judgment. With regular practice, self-compassionate responses gradually become more automatic and accessible, even during difficult times. What initially might feel awkward or contrived, actively offering yourself kindness during struggle, eventually becomes a natural way of relating to your own experience. This represents a profound shift from being your own harshest critic to becoming your own wise and supportive friend, especially when life is challenging. This compassionate self-relationship creates the foundation for all other Buddhist emotional practices. When we can hold our own suffering with kindness and understanding, we develop the capacity to work skillfully with the full range of human emotions, not by conquering or controlling them, but by meeting them with an open heart and clear seeing that allows their natural wisdom and energy to emerge. Self-compassion creates a solid foundation for our emotional well-being, but Buddhism also offers sonic practices that work directly with sound, breath, and awareness to transform difficult emotions. Buddhist chanting and mantras provide a powerful modality for emotional purification that engages different aspects of our being than silent meditation practices. These sound-based approaches have been used for thousands of years across various Buddhist traditions and continue to offer effective tools for emotional healing today. Buddhist chanting and mantra recitation work through the intimate connection between sound, breath, and consciousness. When we chant or recite mantras, we're not just saying words or making sounds, we're creating vibrations that affect our physical body, influence our breath patterns, and focus our minds in specific ways. This multidimensional engagement makes these practices particularly effective for breaking through emotional blockages that might be resistant to other approaches. One of the primary benefits of chanting practices is how they interrupt the circular thinking patterns that fuel difficult emotions. When we're caught in anxiety, for instance, our minds typically spin in repetitive loops of worry. Similarly, depression often involves ruminative negative thoughts about ourselves or our situations. The rhythmic nature of chanting, combined with attention to the sounds and sensations involved, effectively disrupts these thought patterns by engaging our attention differently. Unlike simply distracting ourselves with random activities, Chanting directs our attention in a focused, intentional way. Many Buddhist mantras embody specific qualities such as compassion, wisdom, or purification that are deliberately cultivated through practice. For example, the well-known mantra Om Mani Padme Hum is associated with compassion. When reciting this mantra, practitioners aren't just making sounds, they're consciously connecting with and developing compassionate qualities within themselves. The physical act of chanting also affects our nervous system in beneficial ways. The controlled breathing required for sustained chanting naturally slows and regulates the breath, which has a direct calming effect on the sympathetic nervous system, our fight-or-flight response. The vibrations created in the chest, throat, and head during chanting can help release physical tension that accompanies and sustains emotional states like anxiety or anger. Different Buddhist traditions offer various forms of chanting for different purposes and temperaments. In Tibetan Buddhism, complex visualizations often accompany mantra recitation, engaging the imagination alongside sound and breath. In Zen and other East Asian traditions, chanting sacred texts like the Heart Sutra combines meaning with sound. Theravada practices might include rhythmic recitation of traditional protection verses or loving-kindness phrases. For those new to these practices, simple mantras can be most accessible. Even reciting a single syllable like Om with full attention can create a noticeable shift in emotional state. The key is not the complexity of what's being chanted, but the quality of attention brought to the practice. With each recitation, we try to be fully present with the sound, feeling its vibrations in the body and noticing its effects on our mental and emotional state. Many people find that mantras offer a particularly helpful support during times of emotional intensity or crisis, when anxiety or fear is overwhelming. Trying to sit in silent meditation might feel impossible. In these moments, the structure and engagement of mantra recitation can provide just enough support to stay present rather than being swept away by emotional currents. The mantra becomes like a raft, allowing us to navigate turbulent emotional waters rather than drowning in them. The repetitive nature of mantra practice also helps retrain mental patterns over time. By repeatedly directing our attention toward positive qualities like compassion, clarity, or peace through specific mantras, we gradually strengthen these qualities in our consciousness. This doesn't happen through magical thinking, but through the natural process of neuroplasticity. Our brains literally change through repeated patterns of attention and engagement. Research in neuroscience and psychoacoustics increasingly supports the effectiveness of these ancient practices. Studies have shown that rhythmic chanting affects brainwave patterns, typically increasing alpha and theta waves associated with relaxed alertness and deep meditation. Other research demonstrates how vocalization practices influence heart rate variability, a key marker of emotional resilience and nervous system flexibility. Unlike many contemporary approaches to emotional management that focus primarily on the cognitive dimension, chanting engages our embodied experience directly. The vibrations of sound move through the body, working with emotional energy at a level that often precedes or transcends conceptual understanding. This makes chanting particularly valuable for emotions that feel stuck in the body or resistant to insight-based approaches. Practically speaking, chanting can be integrated into daily life in various ways. Some practitioners begin or end their day with a set period of mantra recitation, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes of a chosen mantra to set a positive intention or clear accumulated emotional tension. Others use shorter recitations throughout the day, perhaps silently repeating a mantra for a few minutes during a break or while walking between activities. Many find it helpful to have specific mantras for particular emotional challenges. When anxiety arises, you might work with a mantra associated with fearlessness or stability. For anger, a mantra connected to peace or compassion might be most beneficial. For grief or sadness, mantras related to healing or transformation could provide support. Over time, you develop a personal toolkit of sonic resources for different emotional needs. Group chanting creates another dimension of practice, as voices joining together create a powerful field of shared intention and support. Many Buddhist centers and meditation groups incorporate chanting into their gatherings, allowing participants to experience both the personal and collective aspects of these practices. The feeling of your individual voice merging with others can itself be a profound medicine for the isolation that often accompanies difficult emotions. For those concerned about the religious aspects of traditional mantras, it's worth noting that the benefits of these practices don't depend on specific beliefs or affiliations. While understanding the traditional meanings can enhance practice, many people experience significant benefits simply through the attentive engagement with sound, breath, and awareness that chanting involves. The practices can be approached as practical tools for emotional well-being rather than as expressions of particular religious commitments. As with all Buddhist practices, the ultimate purpose of chanting and mantra recitation isn't just temporary relief from difficult emotions, but genuine transformation of our relationship with all experience. Through consistent practice, many people find that the qualities cultivated through chanting, whether compassion, clarity, stability, or others, gradually become more accessible in daily life, even when they're not actively chanting. The practice reshapes our emotional tendencies at a deep level, creating lasting changes in how we respond to life's challenges. All the Buddhist approaches we've explored, from mindfulness meditation to ethical living, from self-compassion to chanting practices, ultimately point toward integrating these insights and skills into everyday life. This is where right mindfulness, sammasati in Pali, becomes particularly important. Rather than treating emotional freedom as something we cultivate only during formal meditation or retreat settings, right mindfulness extends awareness into every aspect of daily life, transforming ordinary activities into opportunities for liberation. Right mindfulness represents one component of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, but it serves as the thread that connects all aspects of practice. It involves bringing clear, non-judgmental awareness to our experience as it unfolds moment by moment, whether we're engaged in formal meditation or routine activities. This continuous awareness creates the conditions for lasting emotional freedom rather than temporary states of calm or insight. The practice begins with recognizing that every moment offers an opportunity for mindful presence. Eating breakfast, commuting to work, talking with colleagues, washing dishes, or browsing social media. All these activities can be approached with the same quality of aware attention we bring to formal meditation. This doesn't mean maintaining perfect concentration at all times, which would be unrealistic. Rather, it means repeatedly bringing awareness back to our direct experience whenever we notice we've been lost in autopilot. What makes this continuous mindfulness particularly powerful for emotional freedom is how it helps us catch emotional reactions at their earliest stages, before they gain momentum and take over. With regular practice, we begin to notice the subtle beginnings of anger, anxiety, or other challenging emotions, perhaps a slight tension in the chest, a change in breathing, or a barely perceptible shift in our thought patterns. Recognizing these early signals creates space to respond skillfully rather than react automatically. In practical terms, right mindfulness in daily life involves bringing awareness to three key aspects of experience: our body, our feelings, and our mind states. Bodily awareness means staying connected to physical sensations as we move through activities, noticing the feeling of our feet on the ground while walking, the sensations in our hands while working, or the posture of our body while sitting in a meeting. This embodied awareness helps anchor us in the present moment rather than getting lost in mental projections about past or future. Awareness of feelings involves noticing the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral tone of our experiences moment by moment. Is this conversation feeling pleasant or unpleasant? Does this task have a quality of ease or struggle? This simple recognition helps us see how our automatic reactions to these feeling tones, grasping at the pleasant, pushing away the unpleasant, create much of our emotional suffering. With awareness, We can experience these feeling tones without automatically reacting to them. Mindfulness of mind states means recognizing the overall quality of our consciousness in each moment. Is the mind clear or clouded? Focused or scattered? Contracted in aversion or expansive with goodwill? This meta-awareness helps us recognize patterns in our mental landscape and make skillful adjustments when needed. If we notice the mind becoming repeatedly judgmental during a meeting, for instance, we might intentionally bring in qualities of curiosity or compassion to balance this tendency. One of the most valuable applications of right mindfulness comes during challenging interactions with others, when difficult emotions are most likely to arise. Rather than being completely identified with our emotional reactions, mindfulness helps us maintain awareness of what's happening internally as we engage externally. We might notice tension arising in the body, the impulse to interrupt, or thoughts of defensiveness, all while continuing the conversation. This dual awareness allows us to respond more skillfully rather than being driven by automatic reactions. The Buddha offered specific instructions for practicing mindfulness during such interactions. We can pay attention to our tone of voice, noticing if it's becoming harsh or defensive. We can observe our facial expressions and body language, seeing if they align with our words and intentions. We can notice when we're no longer listening, but just waiting for our turn to speak. Each moment of awareness creates a small space of freedom where we can choose our responses rather than being controlled by habitual patterns. Right mindfulness also involves bringing awareness to the content and quality of our speech. Are we speaking truthfully? Are our words helpful or harmful? Are we speaking at the appropriate time and in a way the listener can receive? The Buddha emphasized mindful speech as particularly important because our words directly affect others and often reveal our own emotional states. By bringing awareness to how and what we communicate, we catch many emotional reactions before they're expressed in ways we might later regret. With consistent practice, right mindfulness gradually transforms deeply ingrained emotional habits. What initially requires deliberate effort, pausing to notice bodily sensations during an emotional trigger, for instance, eventually becomes more natural and automatic. The gap between stimulus and response slowly widens, creating more space for wise choice. Emotions don't stop arising, but our relationship with them fundamentally changes. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. The Buddha compared the development of mindfulness to the gradual wearing away of an axe handle through use, so subtle day by day that it's imperceptible, yet over time creating profound change. Each moment of remembering to be present, each time we catch ourselves on autopilot and gently return to awareness, contributes to this gradual transformation of our emotional patterns. What makes right mindfulness particularly valuable is its accessibility in all circumstances. Unlike formal meditation, which requires setting aside specific time and creating supportive conditions, mindfulness in daily life can be practiced anywhere, anytime. Waiting in line, stuck in traffic, during a difficult conversation, or in the middle of a busy workday. All these moments offer opportunities to practice presence and develop emotional freedom. Many practitioners find it helpful to use specific activities as mindfulness bells or reminders throughout the day. You might choose to be fully present each time you wash your hands, walk through a doorway, or hear your phone notification sound. These ordinary triggers become invitations to return to awareness, gradually increasing the percentage of your day spent in mindful presence rather than automatic reactivity. Technology can be either a major obstacle to mindfulness or a potential support, depending on how we relate to it. Many people find that their devices pull them into states of distraction and emotional reactivity. Right mindfulness involves bringing awareness to our use of technology, noticing the impulse to check our phones, being conscious of how social media affects our emotional state, and deliberately choosing when and how we engage with digital tools rather than being controlled by them. The ultimate insight of right mindfulness is that emotional freedom isn't a distant state to be achieved through years of practice. but a capacity available in each moment of aware attention. Every time we step out of automatic reactivity and bring clear seeing to our experience, we're experiencing a moment of emotional freedom. These moments gradually extend and connect, creating a continuous thread of awareness that transforms our relationship with all experience, including our most challenging emotions. Through the consistent application of right mindfulness in daily life, we discover that the obstacles to emotional freedom weren't the emotions themselves, but our unconscious, habitual reactions to them. As the Indian Buddhist master Shantideva said, "Where would I find enough leather to cover the entire surface of the earth? But with leather on the soles of my shoes, it's as if the whole world is covered." Similarly, by covering our experience with mindfulness rather than trying to control all conditions, we find freedom right in the midst of our ordinary, human lives. The various Buddhist practices we've explored, from formal meditation to ethical living, from compassion cultivation to mindful consumption, from mantra recitation to continuous awareness, work together as an integrated approach to emotional well-being. Each supports and enhances the others, creating a comprehensive path toward freedom from toxic emotions. This path doesn't promise a life without emotional challenges, but offers something perhaps more valuable: the capacity to meet all emotional experiences with wisdom, compassion, and presence, transforming even the most difficult feelings into opportunities for deeper understanding and growth.